and welcome. Before I go any further, Non-Plantla, you said you've got a thing of announcements you want to make. So can I hand over to you first?
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you, Chair. We have a request from the sound and technician desk that you please tilt the mic to your side when you're speaking, and you turn it on and you turn it off when you're done. It is very sensitive, as you've just noticed when I was speaking. Thank you, Chair. And then apologies, can I read them now? Right, we have the following apologies. We've got apologies from Alderman Hill Lewis, Commissioner Bobby Peak, Bishop Umlwane, Commissioner Enos Mbodi, Commissioner Princess Sagani, Commissioner Zamakanyile is part attending, Minister Barbara Creasy, Commissioner Joanne Bate, and Minister Nzimande, who was supposed to attend, but at the late hour is pulled back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to say that you may notice I don't have my spectacles on, so I can't see very clearly. Put up with me if I. Normally, when you put up your hands, I make like I don't see it. But today, I really won't see it. You know, it won't be my usual pretending like I don't see it. This morning, the commissioners discussed the tenure of the executive director. As you know, that the executive director's tenure goes on end of March 2025, and we have been discussing how we transition from that. We have agreed that the executive director will continue as executive director until that date. But as from the 1st of July, we would have 70% of his time only. Executive director taking new work for 30% of other time. And we are quite comfortable that this will not create any wobble in the work of the commission. The other matter that we had some discussion on is what are the implications of change in the government administration for the commission. Right now, it's basically a wait and see. As soon as a new administration comes in, if there's a new president, of course, we'll have a new chair. But some of the commissioners are pretending we'll have the same person president. I don't know how they know that, but that's what they are assuming that's what will happen. And once we have a new minister, we will brief him or her on the current situation and set the ball in motion for succession of the deputy chair, succession of the executive director, and all of that. And just for you to know, my intention is to ensure that we have a very smooth transition with proper overlaps, proper handovers, and that we don't have any gaps and any acting positions and those sorts of stuff, because that always destabilizes institutions. So far, everything is being done according to what the books call best practice. That having been said, Crispin, can I hand over to you for your report?
Thank you, Chair, and very good morning, commissioners and secretariat members. If the presentation could be flighted. So this is, I'm going to give a brief update on our work. Those are the broad headings I'm going to cover. And just to note that the working group chairs are going to be reporting in a lot more detail on their different programmatic activities. So this is just a high-level snapshot. Firstly, since the last meeting, we've issued 3 reports and recommendations. There was a really exciting youth perspective series. And this was a compilation of research pieces from a cross-section of young authors. It's the author's own opinions. It wasn't a recommendation of the commission or anything. So we didn't bring it here for approval. It reflects the author's view. And we launched that at a youth workshop on the 6th of March. And thank you to the commissioners that participated in that. Then as you would all know, in the last commission meeting, we had approved our comments on the draft IRP and on the social ownership of renewable energy recommendations. So both of those were submitted. The IRP comments, in addition to sending them to DMRE, we sent a covering letter to the president and gave him a brief snapshot of the recommendations. And, similarly with the social ownership recommendations, they got sent to the president as well as a number of ministers, DMRE, DTIC. Then we've, as usual, done, we're continuing with our ongoing program of local community and labor consultations. And just to note, on the financing side, we've met twice with the COSATU Climate Change Committee. We've met with the Life After Coal and Fair Finance Coalition. The work around the partnership implementation model, we've had a series of meetings in Mpumalanga with labor, business, the Kamati Community Forum, and the local authorities. So there's been a lot of consultation going on about that. We also had a visit to Kamati with the UK 2070 Commission, and then there was a workshop at the TUT campus in Emalahleni. And we had a big showing at the Ndalo Inclusive Conference with various commissioners attending and a set of side events on stakeholder engagement and communications. Then we've hosted a number of public events. There was the workshop on mobilizing finance for a just transition in March. We had a roundtable on new energy vehicles with various industry players. We did a side event during the World Bank spring meetings in Washington on financing just transitions. We had an excellent seminar with the DPRU team from UCT on labor markets and just transitions. There've also been a third round of engagements with the Adaptation Learning Lab. And recently on the 3rd of June, we had the seminar which showcased research around climate, biodiversity, and economics. Very well attended, 200 online participants. And the research presentations were really very insightful. Just to say, I mean, myself and the management team have continued with an ongoing program of engaging key agencies. So some of those are trying to bed down the relationships with national government departments, so National Treasury, DPME. We met with Working on Fire. We've met with NERSA. We also, now that the DG has changed in Mpumalanga, met with the new acting DG. And then we've been deliberately trying to reach out beyond the sort of traditional universities who feature in a lot of our research. So there've been engagements with the Tshwane University of Technology, with the University of Mpumalanga, and with the Vaal University of Technology. And we'll continue that program moving forward. So we're trying to build a much wider and deeper engagement with the academic institutions in the country. Then, we have an ongoing program of engagement with development partners. And many of these either fund us or they're collaborating with us around various pieces of work, particularly in Mpumalanga. And I don't need to go through all of them, but just to say there's, on the donor side, there's a new World Bank country director in place, and there's also a new UNDP country rep. So we've, actively built relationships with them. We're talking to a lot of the private entities around our program. So SAPI, we've met with RCL Foods, with York Timbers, with Sariti and Sariti Green, who do some really exciting stuff in Mpumalanga. And recently with ABSA, that builds on a lot of previous engagements we've had with other banks. So Standard shouldn't be feeling left out of this. I've previously spoken with the Standard team. So yeah, very active program of reaching out to development partners. Then just to report, I wanted to touch on the Komati decommissioning. I mean, as commissioners know, we issued this report last year. It, I think, is now widely accepted, and its findings have been acted on. And there have been a couple of really good developments. So Eskom's now got an implementing agent for what they call Component C, which is the socioeconomic development part of the Komati decommissioning. And the JET IP, PMU, and the IDC have mobilized the Social Employment Fund, who are kickstarting short-term work opportunities in Komati. And you'll remember that one of our recommendations was for a coordinated approach between the different implementing agencies, which there was a little bit of frustration that that kind of coordination wasn't happening. And at the request of Minister Creasy and Minister Gordhan, we then initiated a program of monthly meetings, which bring Eskom, DPE, DFFE, the Mpumalanga province, the local authorities, some of the key donors, some of the NGOs active in the space to, just align and coordinate activities. And we've now started to set up work streams. And this is just a snapshot of the different work streams that we're going to be discussing at the coordination meeting next week. We don't need to deal with this in detail, and they could change as an outcome of that meeting. But just to show you the breadth and complexity of what's going on at Komati around community development, a long-term development plan, infrastructure and social facilities, economic diversification, mobilization of financial resources, comms coordination, and monitoring and evaluation. And Melissa will later, I think, pick up on some of the M&E aspects around Komati. Then I do want to just briefly comment on our work around just transition. And I'm going to pose a couple of questions which you might want to reflect on. So just to, first of all, say, I mean, we've got various engagements ongoing. There's one with the mining sector, so trying to get the just transition integrated into the way that the mining sector thinks about Mpumalanga and other fossil fuel operations. We're doing very detailed work into research work on employment, skills, and finance. And one of the papers we're going to be considering later, Shamini is going to talk to it, is on just transition financing. We've had a series of discussions with National Treasury on integrating this into the fiscal framework. We've also had, through DPME, an opportunity to engage, to review and comment on all of the department's strategic plans and annual performance plans. And, you know, we critique them from the perspective of the just transition. So that's really been extremely helpful, the DPME sort of link. And through that, we've made input into the medium-term development plan, which government's going to be looking at in this new administration. We do want to pose the question about how we manage just transition issues going forward. So at the moment, all of the work on just transition gets reported into the net zero working group. And it's quite a burden for that working group. I mean, they're basically covering all of the mitigation work and all of the just transition. And, you know, this isn't a new question, but we as the Secretariat are thinking about whether that's sustainable going forward and whether there should be a new working group established. We've also, you know, you'll remember from last year, we did this work around what we call the Just Transition Implementation Plan. And we'd had a big consulting team working on drafting such a plan. But a couple of players have questioned whether we should be pursuing that. And in particular, the JET IP team, you know, put out an implementation plan on the JET. And there was a lot of concern from them that on the back of the JET IP implementation plan, we were just going to cause massive confusion in the market. And we've sort of come to the view that given the integration work that we're pursuing now, the sort of moment for such an implementation plan has passed. But that's a strategic decision. It's not really something we can just make as the Secretariat. We also weren't entirely happy with the product that we had out of the last process. And it would require, in our opinion, substantive further work. So that's not out of the question, but we are skeptical about whether we should move forward with that or rather continue to focus on the various integration and mainstreaming exercises we're busy with. The one thing we do want to bring to your attention, so we had a meeting, you know, you'll recall we had this bilateral engagement with the National Planning Commission, I think 2 years ago now. And we had a follow-up meeting as the Secretariat and would like to propose that there's another bilateral engagement between this commission and the National Planning Commission, in particular to discuss this. It's got another acronym. It used to be called the MTSF. It's now called the MTDP, Medium Term Development Plan. So don't be confused by the acronym. But I think it would be a very topical issue of discussion, plus following up on a lot of the other things that we talked about. So I know I'm posing a sort of a whole lot of conceptual questions there, and a proposal around this National Planning Commission follow-up meeting. And we can maybe, you know, some of these issues don't need to be solved here and now. We could maybe have the Planning Commission engagement and then come back to some of the other questions. Just to quickly say, there's some work in the pipeline that's ready or nearly complete. 2 of the reports are going to be considered here. So the State of Climate Action Report and the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. Just to note that we're quite advanced on financing approaches on the adaptation side. And in the next commission meeting, we'll be bringing proposals around the adaptation and the Climate Response Fund that the President announced in the State of the Nation address this year. And we've been doing some of the design work with DFFE around that. So we're going to be bringing proposals around that. We also will be bringing the employment strategy work that's been very widely consulted now. And to note that the Municipal Just Energy Transition Support Program, which was launched with these 10 municipalities and Selga, Cogta, C40 and the PMU, is well underway, and we'll be reporting on that in the next meeting. A few governance matters in closing. Just to note that there were 5 commissioners whose terms were linked to the 6th administration, which was a little bit odd. And the presidency has extended their appointments and lined them up with the rest of the commission. But because of a cabinet decision, they were reluctant to make any new appointments. So there are vacancies for both Eskom and COSATU that will be filled by the new administration. Then, you know, as you all know, the climate change. It is December 2025.
1st of January, the commissioners are not allowed to refer to themselves.
Yeah, they're out.
If government doesn't appoint new commissioners, then that's what I'm just concerned about is that often what happens is that, you know, often governments take time to fill a vacancy.
Yeah.
You have nobody in that. So what will there be like no commission?
No,
just for that, because what you may want to do is bring it to the attention of the new administration that we may not want to do that, and they may want to put in a transitional thing to say, unless the new commission hasn't been something of that sort. Otherwise, you're not going to have a commission. And then, well, maybe the executive would like that. They're law unto themselves. But
it's. Thank you for the suggestion, Jay. No, the plan is to initiate the process as early, you know, give it sufficient time, given that there's now a public nominations process envisaged in the climate change bill. And there's normally quite a long process to get it approved through cabinet.
does it go to Parliament?
No, it's appointments by the president following a public consultation process. And we're already engaging with the presidency and DFFE around giving effect. So, I mean, by no later than the middle of next year, we should have initiated the process. And we're, just to note, we're busy engaging DFFE now on the implementation of the bill, which we expect to be signed into law as soon as the new president takes office, as well as drafting the regs. We've already discussed the feasibility study and business case, which has been submitted to DFFE and National Treasury. There's a new organogram for the PCC. I presented it in the last meeting. It's now been approved both by our Finance and Governance Committee and by NEDLAC. And we're starting the process to migrate staff into permanent posts. based on a change management process. And there's a 3-year business plan which is to be approved at this meeting. And the targets from that will then get pulled into the NEDLAC annual performance plan, which will be our statutory document for holding us to target. So that's it on the governance matters. And yeah, just, once again to repeat our gratitude as the Secretariat to all of you who, we badger outside of meetings for various roles, and commissioners always eagerly take up, the various assignments, meetings, workshops, stakeholder engagements. And I know it's a big demand on your time, and we really appreciate it. And yeah, to my Secretariat colleagues for their ongoing dedication and hard work.
Not, then let's go on to the report from the Adaptation and Resilience Working.
Morning. Thank you. Brief report from the Association and the working group is successfully using the formula of closed commissioners only meetings, followed by the full working group on climate adaptation and at our recent working group meeting, we had a extensive discussion on the progress of the various projects in the portfolio, and in particular how the current projects will lend themselves as pivotal building blocks to the just adaptation and resilience investment plan. This includes the climate change fund project, amongst others. The working group received presentations from the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and Environment on the biodiversity DABA and the biodiversity strategy, as well as the loss and damage mitigation studies that the department is conducting. This week, in fact, in the past days, we have been reminded of the fact impact of climate change with the devastating and destructive floods around the city, particularly in Gqeberha and Pravin. The tornado event in Tonga is historic and unprecedented. If anyone needed a reminder of the impact of plus 1.5 critical degrees above industrial levels, as we have seen in 2023, this is certainly that. In general, climate-related disasters have migrated from annual events to now almost monthly occurrences. The Secretariat will prioritize the project on climate-related disaster management. In the next meeting in September, we hope to update the Commission meeting on the recommendations of the actualization of the climate change response fund, as mentioned already by the Executive Director in his report. The final report on and recommendations on climate risk prediction and forecasting as a critical contribution to the Environmental Information Services agenda. So that's the second update that we give at the forthcoming meeting. And we'll also have a progress report on the PCC's on the President Climate Change Commission's work on informal settlement and climate change. And lastly, we'll also give a progress report on the climate-related disaster management project. Thank you very much.
building regulations were not adhered to. And I keep, a big part of the resilience is actually building regulations and planning regulations. And I wonder if we are able to say, at least with the bigger municipalities, whether they are using the same set of regulations and planning tools that were used before the big worry about climate change, or whether they have changed their building regulations in any sort of way. That's an area that I always wonder, you know, whether we have that. I don't know if you've ever looked into that. Lungisa?
No, just thanks, Chairman. I just wanted to add that sometimes having sort of modern or modernized regulation is just the first step to that adaptation. Then you need to have the capacity to enforce them.
Yeah.
Rigorously. And we know that even with the old rules, have been instances where there were failures to sort of enforce rigorous the regulation. That has become even more important now in the context of the future Europe.
All right. Anybody? Yes, it would be nice if you could say something.
Thanks, Chair. I'll help you. In terms of your question, certainly most of our, if you look at the infrastructure, you just watch the television, most of our infrastructure has been scaled and designed using 60s principles. When rainfall was spread over 3 months, the rainy season. Now the 3 months of rainfall arrives in 2 days. And this is the effect. So most of our infrastructure has not been scaled for this type of thing. So that water just then overwhelms everything. And this is the destruction that we are looking at. We are actively looking at research to update the models, to take into account. And even in the report, it will be discussed later, is this no regrets type of planning, that even if nothing happens, you have a system that's well designed for
Good. Shall we go on then to the Net Zero Pathways Working Group?
Thank you, Chair. So this is covering, as the Executive Director pointed out, two major work programs. So I'm going to start with the employment strategy work, and just to say that there are very excellent plans moving about economic diversification in Mpumalanga. If people are interested, you know, there's work on biomass for biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel. There was a recent meeting about the aviation fuel opportunity and what's needed to get it realized. Looking at growing existing sectors in Mpumalanga, citrus, nuts, wood, but also new agricultural sectors like hemp, data centers, tourism, and then outside of the PCC, other players in the province, companies and so on, are looking at a community-owned recycling plant, agrivoltaics, mini-grids, renewable energy plants, and use of all the fly ash that's lying around in Mpumalanga in big dumps, on big dumps. So, I mean, I think that's very exciting, because to really get a whole region reorientating its economy is an enormous exercise. And we are showing that, you know, in that sense, there can be a just transition. There can be new livelihood opportunities flourish. Then also on the skills development side, in line with the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan, which has that pillar on green hydrogen. There is work with the Department of Higher Education and Training to look at what are the skills needed for green hydrogen industry. Quite interestingly, the departments and the research finds that there's 138 types of jobs, occupations that will be needed, of which 10 are entirely new in the country. We don't have people doing those kind of jobs at the moment. So very interesting work there. On the adaptation and resilience side, we're starting to look at what are the employment needs and skills needs for adaptation and resilience, which I think is not much exploration has been done of that, and I think that's really excellent. And I just want to flag that within that arena of work, there's a focus on care work. And care work is the work done largely by women, unpaid or paid, to ensure that we all have food on our tables, that the sick are cared for, that houses are clean, all that work that, is often quite invisible. And so I think that it's really important that we are focusing on that care work dimension, because that is really one of the key aspects you have to address if you want to address the gender justice in the transition. So I'm very excited that we are looking at that. Okay, turning to the litigation side of the work. I mean, there's so much more I can tell you. It's very interesting and relevant, but I'm mindful of our time. So we are looking at processes to develop a commission recommendation on the new nationally determined contribution that South Africa must deliver to the UNFCCC in 2025. So the DFFE is busy working on a draft nationally determined contribution, which they will put out for discussion and take to provinces this year. We very much want our work to complement what the DFFE is doing. So, the DFFE will do provincial consultations. We would like to do our usual thing where we work with each of our stakeholder groups. So we will have consultations in those groups to gather views before finalizing a commission recommendation on the nationally determined contribution.
Does it have to be filed at the COP in 2025 or before the COP? Do you know the date?
It's every 5 years, so it's in that year of 2025. There isn't a fixed.
There isn't a fixed date. You
no.
can do it at any time.
But I do think that countries, they like to submit their NDCs before the COPs, just for the PR of it. But, in the actual Paris Agreement, it's the year is the deadline, not a specific date.
And our work on that is yet to start.
No, I think we have started looking at, the State of Climate Action Report, for example, that we're going to talk about later, has, examines the question of, are we on track to meet our existing targets? What are the levels that are needed for achieving a 1.5 or well below 2 degree compatible kind of trajectory, etc. So we have started a bit. But yeah, our deep technical work will still come, and all the consultations. Then, thank you for my slide. I want to end us with this slide, which is a piece of research that has been done under this group. Now, down the left-hand side there, you see BAU, NZ, and 1.5 degrees Celsius. BAU is business as usual. If we just continue, as normal and do nothing about climate change mitigation. NZ is net zero, a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions by 2050. 1.5 degrees means you're taking actions that are compatible with holding global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. And the pairs there, the first lot is South Africa's action. So if South Africa does BAU or net zero or BAU or net zero. The second part of the pairs is what the rest of the world does. So if the rest of the world does business as usual, or, does actions compatible with 1.5 degree. And then we've modeled and scenarioed what happens under each of those cases. I want to draw your attention to, okay, so firstly, if South Africa takes climate action and the rest of the world does nothing, in other words, it continues with business as usual, that means we're heading for a 3-degree world, because South Africa is only 1% of the global emissions picture. So we need to take our own fair share of the action. But if we do everything and the rest of the world does nothing, then we're heading for these kind of temperatures. So it requires that the rest of the world goes 1.5 for us to have a livable situation. But look at the GDP figures in 2030 and 2040. If we go net zero, even if the rest of the world goes business as usual, we see quite a significant uptick in the GDP figures. Also in the next columns, SA means employment in South Africa. In 2030 and 2050, we see increased levels of employment. And then the last 2 columns are, what we're doing with our emissions. But look at the next one. If we do business as usual and the rest of the world goes 1.5 compatible, our GDP drops and our employment figures drop, because we will be behind the curve of, the rest of the world will be wanting to drive around in electric vehicles, and we would have lost jobs if we are not producing those electric vehicles, etc. Or the rest of the world will be transitioning out of coal and there will be no market for our coal. Then the last line, where we do net zero and the rest of the world does 1.5, that's sort of, the best climate scenario. But again, there you see our GDP and employment goes up. So very important message out of this modeling and research that we've done is that even regardless of what the rest of the world does, whether they stick to business as usual or they go in the right climate direction, if we go in the right climate direction, it is good for our economy and socio-economic outcomes and job outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Louise, I like the overall approach which you are taking, and that is that we will be determining the right NDCs, which are right for us for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is that we are part of a multilateral process globally, but that's only one of the reasons. I think it's very important to do that because we are likely to get a lot of resistance if it looks like we're only doing this because we are signatories to global agreements. We will get a lot of resistance to that. Now, you'll know that in this period, we just had our elections, but in this period, about half of the world's population is going to elections in these few months. That's a very big thing that's happening in the world right now. And you will have noticed in our election campaign, climate change was not an issue at all. There were lots of things that was an issue, but nobody was saying, vote for us, we will do something right on climate change. Where it may have been an issue, it was vote for us and we will reject all these climate change people. In some instances, that had come up. And it's not just a South African thing. Globally, nobody's campaigning on climate change. So you've got India, a population of 1.5 billion people going to a very, very challenging election right now. Climate change does not feature on any of the parties' agendas at all. And I think it's important for us to take that into account as we go into the NDCs, because we could live in a little fool's paradise of our own, when it doesn't matter what we say, at all, because nobody's. So the work which we do must be based on what is in our interest. And it is in our interest to be part of a multilateral process, but we have a whole range of interests and we need to contextualize it properly. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. And that's happening all around the world, including in Europe, because if you look at some of the traditional green parties that were there are now anything but progressive in a sort of general sense. So I think, Crispian, we must start putting our thinking hats on and do this thing in a manner that is, and we can't fail to take into account the views of the South African electorate. You got to take into account what the public thinks, and the public has voted the way it has voted. So the majority of the votes have gone to parties who have had no interest in climate change whatsoever in this issue. And that is just the reality which we're faced with right now. Try to look so it means that what you're saying is very important, that why we're doing this work. We're not just doing it because as some people say, we're trying to be nice to foreigners. We're doing it because it's actually, we're trying to be nice to our own economy. Let's go on to the working group report on climate finance. Welcome to the CEO of Eskom. We're just taking the reports on a few working groups and then we'll come to you. You're not in a hurry, are you? I mean, everything's going well, the lights are on. What problem can you have?
I hope to be away.
We'll try to take you on at 10 o'clock and release you by 10:45. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So the Climate Finance and Innovation Working Group has been fairly busy this past quarter, Chair. We have had a number of working group meetings, 2 in fact, and extended meetings specifically to approve the Just Transition Financing Mechanism, which is on the agenda for today. So I'm not going to speak too much about that particular piece of work. It's quite a pinnacle piece of work for us. So I'll leave it for the agenda item where we will deal with it in detail. I do want to speak about the various other pieces of work that we have ongoing. The key one is a new piece of work that we are undertaking on CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. The 2 that are being proposed, well, one is in effect in the EU, and then the new one that's being proposed in the UK. So this has come up repeatedly, given the challenges against our products being taxed when it enters certain markets. And so we did an initial study some months ago, and now we are looking to actually concretize that, do some quantification to really understand what the implications are going to be for our economy and specifically some of the sectors, and then what industrial policy will be required for us to put in place. We are also part of the working group with the DTIC, who's going to be submitting comments on the UK CBAM. Comments were requested, and in fact, some of the industry sectors, ourselves included, have submitted comments by yesterday, actually. I think today, actually, sorry. Today, the comments are due. So it's important to understand what that means for us. Right now, iron and steel sector is heavily impacted, cement sector is impacted, and the list goes on to include even hydrogen. And in the future, chemicals is going to be included, which means that we are going to be taxed very heavily when we have these products into. So that's a key piece of work. We will look to bring some of that to the Commission later this year. Then we've got another big project, which is the Municipal Jet Support Program. Chair, this is a critical piece of work in that it actually takes the theory and the tracking of flows and really puts it into practice in terms of now capacitating municipalities to be able to start developing projects and get the pipeline. You know, within the finance space, they often say, you know, there's enough finance, but not a strong project pipeline. Now we are trying to do that, and we're putting this into action. We are looking at 10 municipalities, assessing the gaps and the strengths that they have in terms of developing projects and getting them ready into the space of just transition clean energy. How can we prepare them better? And we're linking them with the JET PMU within the presidency and trying to get that alignment and get some grant funding to these projects on the ground. We have set up a SteerCom, and that SteerCom includes SALGA, COCTA, National Treasury, and Seaport. So we'll also be looking to bring some results on that piece of work fairly soon. On the technology side, it seems to be the poor cousin, Chair. We often haven't reported on detailed work. We are doing a technology diagnostic study, and we're looking at assessing specific technologies. We're finally getting going on that work, and we will look to incorporate alignment with SARAM and other industrial policy objectives, and we will look to bring that as well towards the latter part of this year. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to leave it there because just transition finance and mechanisms on.
No comments? Good, then let's go on to monitoring and evaluation.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. So the monitoring evaluation working group has been busy with 3 major pieces of work, these actually for several months now. The first is the coordination and tracking work on Komati. This work has been led by the Executive Director. You heard him report on that in the ED's report. And it brings together various other parts of the Secretariat, but because of the particular role that the PCC is playing in relation to Komati, this work is housed in the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group. For today's meeting, the M&E team put together a report. It's about 20 pages. It's in your pack on what has been happening over the past 3 months, tracking both progress by this very large group of stakeholders working and the work that they're doing at Komati, but against the PCC's recommendations report. You remember that report that we approved in November 2023. And then secondly, taking into account, very importantly, the specific priorities and proposals of the ward committee from Komati and the surrounding villages. There are many different aspects of this work, but I want to specifically highlight work that's underway, led by non-commissioner working group members with the Mpumalanga government and the local communities to develop a protocol, a set of standards essentially for stakeholders to ensure that processes are facilitated in such a way that affected communities are part of the decision-making about the repowering and repurposing projects at the coal plants. So it's in effect a protocol to give effect to real procedural justice. The aim for this protocol is to be adopted by all the stakeholders and will then also be available for implementation at future sites. So we think of this as quite a critical contribution that we're making through the platform of the PCC. The second piece of work is the State of Climate Action Report, which we're bringing to the PCC today for approval. We'll be discussing this in some detail later, so I won't spend any time on this now. The third piece of work is the monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework for the just transition, which has now been completed and it's been adopted by the working group as a technical report. The development of this framework has been a challenging process. The just transition is, after all, a very complex, multifaceted endeavor. But we think that we have the necessary framework to take this forward into a work program and a learning network for monitoring, evaluation, and learning about the just transition, which is really something in which this commission and also South Africa is a leader in worldwide. And I just wanted to extend a special thanks, first of all, to the team. Katie and Yuri have been working very hard on all these projects, but also in relation to this framework, the JET IP PMU, the South African Monitoring Evaluation Association, SAMIA, the DFFE and the DPME, and the Climate Action Group of community researchers who've been actively inputting into this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Shall we go on to finance?
Okay, if I may, thank you,
Yes.
Chair. So there is a report in the pack. The intention is not to go through that in detail. There are probably 5 things that I'd like to highlight, Chair. The one, and I'll list them now. The one I'm not going to do now because there is another slot on the agenda. That's the business plan and the budget. So I'll keep that for then. But the 4 other things that I do want to highlight, and I'm using the report that was distributed as basis for the feedback. The first one, and Chairperson here, we do need the Commission to approve at least that point. It was the annual review. It's now the 3rd one that was distributed to commissioners. So the detailed report of about 63 pages served in front of the Finance and Governance Committee, was interrogated, considered, and the committee decided or concluded to endorse this for approval to the Commission. So just from a governance point of view, maybe now is the right time to just ask the commissioners if there are any concerns or whether we can then minute that the endorsement from the Governance Committee is accepted for approval here.
There you have it. Okay. Thank you. That's approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for
processing.
that. And then there are 3 other matters that I'll deal with. That's also the budget. So that's just for noting. So clearly, the budget is well, the expenses of the Secretariat and the Commission are all within the budget. I think that's important that we note that. We're very wary that this is not the main concern of the Commission, but we're also aware that if we have concerns there, it's our duty to report this. Obviously, we need to do something. So it is with great relief that I can report that the budget is under control. Then the second last matter is, you would recall, I think about 2 or 3 commissioners meetings ago, we reported on the donor policy and basically agreed at the Commission level here that if there are any donations where there's a risk that it could impact the reputation, it would come here. So just check for confirmation. That was at a high level. But then the further progress, it did leave the Secretariat with some uncertainty. How do they engage? Some of these negotiations take a while. And then based on that, they've developed what's called the standard operating process, which we also discussed at length and in detail. And the arrangement's still the same, but that gives them a little bit more detail and certainty on how to deal with matters. And I just wanted for noting, but obviously it is available should commissioners want to have a review of that. And most of you, the working committee members, have sight of that. So I just report that back. Again, I think that's progress, and it does help the Secretariat with a bit of more certainty. And then lastly is the risk register. It is also in the report. And I can also give assurance that all the controls are in hand. However, the one new emerging risk which we've discussed here, and the intention is not to go further into it, is obviously the emerging risk of continuity and succession planning, which I think you have addressed. But we need to acknowledge that from the Finance and Governance Committee, we'll be working closely with the Secretariat to mitigate that and to make sure that whatever the outcome is the most desirable, less disruptive to this Commission. So that concludes. I will deal then with the business plan a bit later. Happy to take questions. Is there any?
Please go ahead, Dr. Mwale.
It's just one, in terms of, and thank you, Madam. Just one in terms of, we are currently hosted. I want to check in terms of our office space. We have enough office space for their comfort, for us to, for them to have a conducive working condition. If not, you perhaps as a committee want to look at this. Is it your, can it be placed to you at, or in the office of the PT?
Well, Chair, I'm going to pass that to the Executive Director, but let me just first say, obviously, from a committee's point of view, I think it would be part of the committee's scope to have oversight over those expenses. At this stage, there's been nothing, and Christian, now I need that to you to confirm. The committee has received nothing that indicates that the current arrangement at NetLag is not sufficient in the short, medium term. I cannot comment on the longer term, but Christian, maybe you can just comment on that.
So yes, just for the commissioner's benefit. So, I mean, we remain a hybrid organization. So staff are not permanently in the office. We have an agreement with NEDLAC, so they make all of their meeting rooms available to us. We have some office space with, I think, about 6 hot desks. And then also a private office, which was meant for the ED, and I don't use it, so the rest of the staff make use of it. And no one has raised issues around not feeling accommodated. But so, I mean, my view is that the current arrangement sort of works well, and the NEDLAC meeting rooms are really great.
Thank you for that. Shall we go on with the Eskom issue without the minister? Because she said the minister is going to make an introduction.
Yeah,
We can go on to the climate action report.
the minister was scheduled to be with us. I'm just wondering, non-Trump, have you heard?
They said the minister is going to be part of your session. I don't know whether it will be right to, you'll know better. Should we start without the minister? Okay. Okay, good. Very good. As long as I got somebody else to blame, that would be fine.
And Manda's got broad shoulder.
Yeah. Mr. Marokane, it's wonderful to have you here. So nice of you in this terrible cold spell to keep the lights on. I think everybody here is very appreciative of that. Some people have been saying it, you have only been doing it for the elections. But even if that is true, I think it's a phenomenal achievement. And congratulations. I think well done and congratulations. I think it just shows, you know, it contributes to generally a better mood, I think, in the country. And also you'll find that a lot of the economists are saying that the economy is already doing better and will be doing so. Well done and congratulations. It couldn't have been easy and much appreciated. Here they say they entitled this item engagement with Eskom CEO. So the Eskom CEO will say whatever he wants to, and then people will engage with you. I suppose if that's okay. We're starting a bit early, so we'll try to finish this session by 10:30 and then we can release you on that. But over to you. You can say to the commissioners whatever you want.
So thank you very much, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to engage. Chair, I want to confirm that we've kept the lights on as part of our ongoing strategy to improve operational performance. The 29th May date happened to be falling in a window where the confluence of all our interventions were beginning to really give us some results. We continue along that path. We are 72 days on today. Our teams are working very hard, and it's really our people that are driving this program very hard since early last year, once we understood what needed to be pulled together for us to see the results. So thank you for your kind words. I'll relay the message to the teams. Chair, we had a session with the JET PMU team in the presidency. We also had a session with the executive director and some members of the commission about 3 weeks ago. And this was really to try to understand the storyline from the perspective of us delaying the decommissioning of some of the coal stations. And what I thought I'd discuss this morning with the commission, and I really apologize, we didn't share this paper, but we'll make it available hereafter, is to relay in a very succinct form the narrative around the delaying of the decommissioning of these power stations that were earmarked to be shut down between now and 2027. And secondly, to give some verbal feedback with regards to the work that the implementation agency is doing at Komati, almost in a retrospective way, trying to find solutions, as you had said. And there was also a specific request, Crispin, if you recall, relating to accessing the social impact studies that were done by Eskom. So I have engaged with the appropriate structures of the board, and I'll give feedback as to how we move on this. But as a starting point, Chair, and I apologize for coming late. I did get a sense that from your own comments, that there's a context that needs to be taken into consideration as we navigate these issues of how we transition. And for us, the issue of the national circumstances is an important one. I think I don't have to remind the members in here of the impacts of the intense load shedding that was experienced last year and the implications on the economy as a whole. So for us as Eskom, in looking at that program of decommissioning power stations, we had to take into consideration the reality and the threat that still remains with regards to load shedding and the need to balance the supply demand. So we depart from that perspective, that there's a national perspective that is important, that needs to be balanced with the choices that we make, or the timing thereof in particular. The second one is that when we departed and set out the strategy path for the Eskom 2025 strategy, there are some underpinning assumptions that are quite material. First one being the energy availability factor at the time and where we saw it going. We know that that assumption has been violated in the sense that we are more on the negative aspect of it, and hence the results that we saw. The second one is that whilst the DMRE had really moved swiftly with the risk mitigation initiatives around the independent power producers, those projects did not come into place as we expected. And so you sit with a situation where the material conditions that are meant to ensure your situation from a supply perspective have not panned out as anticipated, and therefore the risk remains. And in the face of that, taking off operational units, you can only increase the risk that the country is likely to face. And that's really the context that we sit with. What we are comforted with as Eskom is that these units, if members recall, are units that were returned from mothballing in the early 2010s, 2012. And so in the fleet, they actually have much more better technology from an emissions perspective. And overall, they contribute about 8% of our overall supply perspective, from that perspective. So we have argued that we need to afford ourselves the opportunity to run the stations to 2030, March being the last one. We have accepted that as the passage of time evolves, we have the opportunity to reassess that position. So we have a 5-year planning horizon. We have an annual review of this planning horizon. As assumptions materialize, we have the opportunity to revisit the sequencing towards the latter part of this 5-year plan. And this is what we said we'll remain open and transparent with, because it will also help us in dealing with the overall impact on our P&L towards those latter stages. So that's the position that we've taken. Alongside that, Chair, we've also decoupled, and I know that in some quarters this word sits uncomfortably, but we've said that we do not have to wait for the implementation of our own projects for repowering alongside this coal fleet. We've approved the execution of a solar project at the Tabo to run alongside the coal fleet. We have land, as said before. We have access to the grid close to our power stations. We had put our land up for private sector participation to do renewable projects. That approach has not yielded the kind of results we anticipated. We believe that we can lead that process ourselves in partnership with others. And this will allow us to have a very blended approach in terms of the transition, and also help us deal with some of the unintended consequences that we've noticed from the Komati experience. And so we're now packaging all that work to make a case for us to be able to implement those in the interim as we go towards 2030. Chair, in as far as the expected reduction in the CO2 equivalent target that we have, we believe we'll be able to meet that. We'll be able to meet that from the utilization of our full fleet, in terms of taking the load losses where they exist, and also taking units off as we get through to that space. If anything that I want to leave the Commission with is that we are really in approaching a period of intense fluctuation from a certainty perspective, and we need to be revisiting our plans and assumptions on a much more shorter interval than was the case before. And for that, we have expressed to the commissioners that we met with, we've expressed the same view to the IPG members that we met with. We've met with many of them in the last 2 months, and we've offered to remain available for influence and engagement in fine-tuning this assumption part as we get towards the latter part, towards 2030. So that's where we said, Chair, we've agreed that we'll create a country strip in as far as this approach is concerned, because otherwise there's a risk of not us speaking out of turns and then sending confusing signals on a country perspective. So we have that, Crispin. I think you have it by now. We'll really finalize it, and it's really the position point that we depart from as a country. So that relates to the decommissioning of Komati and of the remaining coal fleet following the experience from Komati. The second point that I wanted to touch is that we have now appointed the implementation agent, Komati. When we met, the agent was on the ground engaging and reviewing the various opportunities for re-stimulating economic activity in that space. We've reported in the first engagement that the board has now approved the PV project at Komati. We've also approved the BESS initiative. We're going into the market following the World Bank procurement processes. Alongside that, we also have now concluded that first phase of work with the implementation agents. In fact, earlier this week, there were workshops held to fine-tune what came out of that process, and in the next few weeks, engagements with key stakeholders will start. So that process is taking place. We have also agreed to not wait for the remainder of the stations, but have this implementation approach also adopted and getting off the ground for the remainder of the stations as we prepare towards 2030. So that's where we are with regards to the implementation agents' work. The last part deals with the issue of the social impact assessment studies that were conducted by Eskom For some reasons, a view was taken previously to hold back on the release of the studies. I have engaged with the board, appropriate the structures following our discussion in the last meeting with the committee or the commission. And the board has agreed that the right thing to do, that we share this documentation with the appropriate stakeholders. So in the next week or two, we'll deal with the issues of how we do that. From an Eskom perspective, we do not want to go silent with regards to their release. We'll have it released in a structured way and make it available. Chair, I pause here and take the question.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair, thank you very much. MD, I'm joining the chair. I'm keeping the light. Chair, I will say this with absolute humility and hoping that I'm not going to be quoted otherwise. Eskom issued coal supply. I think from what we know, up to this, I think it's for 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. It's for 3 years, and you're gonna issue others for the other power stations. And our assessment as CEO is that there is an emerging, like you've indicated, unintended consequence. There's now an appetite for the use of coal in terms of your reach. More people now in those areas are after the coal money. And for us, it's for me, that will be a change. And I'm saying, as you issue this, I'm not going. I do not know how you're going to control because that appetite may lead to resistance to training. And I'm saying this because I know personally some of the entrepreneurs that have interest in that. So I think you understand what I'm saying. For fear of victimization by comrades outside, I want to pause here. But I think Eskom, you need to look closer to that and find an approach how you're going to advertise this tender, because now people are moving up and down, especially in Delmas. You will understand what is happening, and in Makazeni as well. There are various people that are exploring the ground as we are speaking now, and you may need to talk to DMR as well, come to the picture to control that narrative. Thank you very much.
CEO, that is more of a comment and advice for you. You can comment on it. I think it's your first time you are at the commission. So I should just remind you, in case you haven't, that our meetings are broadcast. And so we don't hold confidential meetings. Take that into account when you comment. Melissa?
Thanks. Thank you. And hi, Mr. Marokane. We've met on some of the committee meetings with you. It's really great news to hear about the decoupling that's been reported. I think many civil society organizations have been campaigning for Eskom to be an active participant in the renewable energy program for a long time. So this is very good news. I have a question for you about the delayed decommissioning for those 3 plants. I mean, there are some questions about the actual demand for electricity, given the significant investment by the private sector in particular, whether that is justified and whether Eskom does have the evidence to show that that is actually required. But what I actually want to ask you today is around the board approval by the Eskom board for this delayed decommissioning. So when that was considered by the board, can you share with us whether the board was given a realistic cost analysis of including the cost of the investments in these plants to keep them running until 2030, the costs associated with CBAM, the carbon tax, the cost of complying with the minimum emission standards for air quality before it gave its approval for this delay? Thanks.
Maybe you can comment before on the first two before we take others.
Chair, thank you very much. The comment from Mr. Moale is noted. Let's take the advice on board. It's about messaging and signaling, and we'll pay attention to them. The second question, dealing with the costs, and I can actually share the numbers with you here publicly. We have a figure of just about 85 to 90 billion rands for that for the extended coal operation. About 55 to 60% of that relates to fuel costs, coal costs, which coal costs would have been incurred otherwise elsewhere in the stations that we're going to pick up the load for taking the stations out. So that's a no regret part of our cost. The remaining component deals with the operational maintenance aspects of running these units, because in our initial plans, we had discontinued them, so we're not going to spend anything. There's a revenue associated with this operation of about 102 billion rand. So on a net basis, it cancels off. When we looked at this, we also took into consideration the time to bring the alternative technologies to deal with this energy gap that needs to be served. And this is the most practical aspects to address that gap in the meantime. So that's the basis on which we really looked at this. We very happy to share that approach. The board was favored with these numbers. We started this conversation late last year. It took a number of iterations, and I thank the board's robustness in this regard, leading to the conversation with the board investment committee early this week, and in the coming week, we'll go back and formally update the 2035 strategy. But we have dealt with the issues that are operational. We have dealt with the issues that deals with the financial figures associated with this choice that we have put forth. I just want to also address the issue of the demand going forward. We live in interesting times. In these transition times, we have to spend a lot of effort in reviewing data on shorter time intervals. We understood when we looked at that data from last year that we had some 5% decline in sales. We attributed this decline to both load shedding and also the conversion of some of our customers away from us. We have the benefit of data this year. We've just concluded 2 months of the winter period, April and May. I was pleasantly surprised myself to look at the sales figures last week or 2 weeks ago from our contact centers, especially in our very big load centers. We have seen across all the categories of our customers actually a growth year on year in terms of sales, which suggests that the extent of the reduction that was considered to be coming from the switch of our customers may have been overestimated. So whilst you have the overall decline at the 5% number, the makeup is very different. So there's still appetite for energy coming from our side. The issue that must have hurt us was simply the fact that we didn't have electricity to sell. So we'll have this data also updated in the next 3 weeks as we go through the winter period, and it should help us refine our planning as we go through this. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. I'm also happy to hear about the social impact assessments that Eskom has done and that they will be released to the public. My question is around the research on clean energy and air report that was published by the Center for Research late last year, in October last year, about the impacts of delaying decommissioning, particularly of three power stations, Grootplay, Camden, and Ndrina. And the estimations there was that there would be major social consequences. So for instance, that 15,300 excess air pollution related deaths will occur. That includes over 200 children under the age of 5. There'll be new cases of asthma amongst children. There'll be preterm births. There'll be lost work days, lost school days, chronic illnesses as a result of diabetes. So basically what we're seeing here is a threat to life and the health of people. And these deaths and health impacts on people living in the airsheds of these three plants give significant risk and potential liability to Eskom in the form of damage claims, and class actions. So my question is in three forms. So are there any mitigation measures that Eskom has put in place for these health impacts? Because the right to a healthy environment is an immediately realizable right, according to our constitution. Secondly, how will Eskom pay for such claims? If such damages claims do come up, how do you plan on paying for them? Are there any provisions for such damages?
Thank you very much, Chair. And just one.
Does the CEO know you?
I don't know.
Can you introduce yourself?
I will later. Thank you, Chair.
He's from your union.
Oh,
He's from NUMSA.
thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair.
I don't want him to be negotiating here. No.
No, we don't negotiate. Just, and Chief, thank you very much for the decision of putting the interest of the country first. In your presentation, I did not hear you touching transmission. Now that transmission is an entity on its own. And we can't talk generation without transmission. What will be happening within transmission between now and 2030? If you can just clarify what will be the Eskom's role, and if there's any, because the narrative out there, transmission is gone. Private. If you can clarify that part.
Chair, thank you very much. The questions from Mbali, really noted them, reflecting on them very quickly here. In the scenario that you sketch is applicable throughout beyond Grootplay, Medupi, Komati, everywhere where we're running coal-fired power stations. I started off by indicating that there's a context within which we looked at this decision, and it is primarily based on meeting the energy security for the country and the recognition that we need to place ourselves in a position to start pulling back as soon as we can, as soon as the situation allows. As indicated, the emissions levels coming from the stations generally these stations are having better technology than other ones. And yes, an extra day of running them means the kind of exposures that you indicated, but they are no different from what we have there, and they're no different from what we see from the rest of the fleet. Ours is a commitment to mitigating the implications of continued coal operation as soon as we can practically do so. And Chair, it is within this context that we saw it important that we should accelerate the construction of our own renewables portfolio so that we can have offsets coming through. I forgot to mention in my 9 points that I needed to stress that other than just the renewable portfolio that we need to build and accelerate, we have also consciously done everything within our powers to accelerate the operationalization of the National Transmission Company so that through it, we can be able to enable the country's renewable programs to unfold at a faster pace. The reason why I'm late this morning is because I had an engagement with the chair of that entity as we approach the 1st July operationalization date. So transmission, the setup of the NTCSA is going ahead, Mr. Chavalala. It's a 100% owned subsidiary of Eskom. As previously communicated, it is not privatized. It's intended to enable equal access and more importantly to facilitate an accelerated implementation of transmission grid expansion on the back of Eskom's capability, but also working with the private sector in that.
Thank you. Deepak, and then after that, Lungisa.
Thank you, Chair. CE, thank you very much. That very. I understood the cost benefit analysis. Was a similar analysis of emissions implication also done? I asked this question quite deliberately because there's a general misunderstanding with respect to overall emission, the entire fleet in this very coal, in respect of our coal-dominated generation. Have you done any analysis with respect to what the emissions implication of a slightly delayed decommissioning of these three power plants might look like?
DG.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Mr. Marokane, and congratulations on your appointment. Well, minor comments. The first one is that I actually think that it's important to balance demand and supply and strike that balance and consistently over a long period of time. I think that it's almost actually a precondition for a sustained trajectory of the transition. Because it would just seem to me that a mismatch between the two that leads to load shedding. If it is partly occasioned by or associated with decommission, then it becomes the enemy of transition. I just believe that it actually becomes the enemy. It creates a sort of particularly negative take on the transition. So I'm saying this, and I deeply appreciate the imperative to make sure that we achieve our transition commitment. But our chairman made the comment, I don't know if you were in the room already, about just how here and elsewhere, the climate change issue
either didn't feature in campaigns or they featured in the opposite direction. And I can assure you, in a context where there is a mismatch between demand and supply, fertile ground get created. I just want to say that we appreciate the complexity that we are dealing with, and we think that you, the board, everyone at Eskom, we should support you, whilst at the same time keeping the pressure on, whilst challenging you to say, do more, which takes me then to the next point. That perhaps more than you have already done, it does then become a matter of communication, taking everyone into confidence to say, we are adjusting our plans in the following way, and their impact on the achievement of our goals is the following. But if the following factors change in a way that supports an acceleration of the transition, we will come back again and explain and make the adjustment. Correspondingly, if factors change in the opposite direction, we will take you into confidence and explain again that due to the following factors, we're making the following adjustments until later. And I think that I would encourage you. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fuzile is correct. On the two aspects, it's really the sentiment that drove our thinking. I take to heart the advice to beef up communication and have very clear messaging. The purpose of writing this one script was to really enable us to move from that perspective. So we should be able to implement this going forward. The one point that I probably didn't emphasize enough is the fact that we still remain committed to achieving our targets for 2030 as far as emissions reduction is concerned. And we will achieve this through exploitation of our entire fleet. And this is a combination that we need to be dealing with. So from a perspective of delivering on the targets that we have, we do not see this as a challenge.
You're happy with that? Anybody else? Shamini? Shamini is from Cecil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
I just want you to know these are not neutral parties here. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, CE. I want to just echo the same comments. Thank you for all the efforts. It's definitely reaping benefits. In terms of grid access, is that something that's also going to be looked at as well as grid stability? I know there was a study done by Eskom, I think about a year or so ago, about grid stability with all of the renewables coming on board. You know, we've got a lot of private sector with large plans for renewables procurement and build. So just to ask, what is the perspective and will this be dealt with as well through the transmission company? And you mentioned the targets. I assume this is greenhouse gas targets that you have in terms of a carbon budget. I just wanted to know if there's alignment between yourselves, the IRP and the numbers that are being quoted there, as well as now recently the sector emission targets document has come out from the DFFE. I'm not sure if you're aware of all of this. They've put forward different numbers and I haven't been able to get alignment on it. I know it's a very detailed question, but I just wonder what are those targets, if you can maybe give some color on. Thank you.
Chair, through you, the issues relating to grid expansion and grid stability are all part of our TDP. What the NTCSA board, and currently NTCSA gets operational on the 1st of July, but our transmission team is not waiting, period. We're looking at how to set ourselves up for executing at a faster pace than we have experienced. You'll all know that, excuse me, last year, only about 150 kilometers of transmission lines and associated equipment got installed. There's some reasons for it. But at the peak, the utility was able to do something like 850 kilometers of line per year. So that know-how is there. It requires very oiled supply chain. The entire ecosystem has to be ready. We lost that capability as a country. And so we've invested in preparing for that. It will take care of every aspect of execution, from physical constructions of new lines, but also aspects dealing with stability, the grid, and how to manage it. Part of our investment as Eskom will go towards ancillary services that allows us to manage the grid better. And we'll also know how best to finance those, because this is also a key issue that needs to come to play. And as far as targets are concerned, we're still focusing on a number for the 2030. I'll probably have to go back and check with my team specifics relating to the sector targets that came through. We will align with those. I know this is all a lot of detailed work that's emerged lately, but our focus is to stay on track for the 71 million tons or so at the end of 2030.
Much. Thanks for that, and thanks for the comments you've made and the information that you've shared. I personally found it very illuminating. Mbali, you're not happy? Oh, sorry, I didn't say that. Are there any other hands? Let's just see. Oh, okay, and then Louise, I can see you. Yeah. Okay, let's take it in that order.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And thank you, Mr. Marokane, for sharing the information that you shared with us. I'm just going to make a follow-up about the delay of meeting. And as you were responding, I think Commissioner Mbadi, you had indicated some monetary costs related to the decommissioning of the power station. But what I didn't hear is how are you going to mitigate the externalized costs related to the non-decommissioning of the power station? Currently, there's a health crisis, particularly in the areas where the power stations are, which the Commissioner Mbali has quoted a study that had indicated what some of the externalized costs are. So I'm just checking if you also had indicated that the power stations had the latest technology. I hope I haven't misunderstood you there, but I just needed to check as part of the mitigation plans that you have, what sort of pollution abatement technologies does this power station have? Because that links to the externalized costs, the human life that is going to be lost, the natural habitat around those power stations, and the cumulative impact thereof. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to almost piggyback on the previous commissioner in terms of her comment. Oh, sorry. Rebecca Mass-Ramule, Department of Science and Innovation. And I'm going to ask my question in the context of innovation. Globally, state-owned institutes, especially in developing countries, are at the forefront of innovation. And I think Eskom has done this with the renewable energy sector. You know, you had the wind, Darling Farm early on, or wind became affordable. And I think based on the comments that you're extending, or you're delaying the decommissioning of coal-fired power plants, which we know today have a negative impact on health. I guess my questions are, what are your comprehensive plans of carbon capture, storage, and use to ensure that assets don't continue to, put carbon as well as your other mittens like toxic noxes into the air. But then I think in terms of without a comprehensive carbon capture, use, and storage plan of action, it's going to get challenged to extend those power plants. And then on the back of that, I want to put forward that the Department of Science and Innovation has a very comprehensive carbon capture and storage program. Just a few months ago, we demonstrated that the Kelvin Power Station's ability to today capture toxins, NOxes in particulate matter at 99%. So I think without a partnership with the DSI as well as I think Council for Geoscience, who also have a carbon capture and use program, really the extension or the delay in the decommissioning of those coal-fired power plants will continue to cause challenges.
Right? Have you people now cracked the code on carbon capture? I mean, this is the most amazing thing I'm hearing. Yeah, tell us something. He's our resident scientist, by the way. Huh? Yeah. Let's let Louis speak and then you can comment. Yeah. Louis is from WWF, South Africa. Yeah. Former trade unionist.
No, I never was a trade unionist. Former activist. So if the deputy chair is positioning every commissioner in terms of their interests, let me say this, WWF and myself have no money in this game. Unlike others who earn their income off it, or unlike others who earn their profits off it. So we're probably the best bet for a disinterested party. Okay. So I want to, Deepak alluded to this question, but in a way we haven't gone deep into it. I thank you, Mr. Marokane, for your openness to engage with us and the news you're bringing us. But I'm sitting here trying to sort of absorb because it's good news and bad news. It's good news that the lights will be kept on. It's good news that a slower decommissioning schedule will allow us time to ensure that the alternative livelihoods and plans for workers in the fossil fuel industries and the value chain, that we can get just transition plans in place. It is terrible news for the climate that we are slowing decommissioning, but it is excellent news. I mean, I can't tell you how happy I am that Eskom is getting much more assertively involved in renewable energy. Because, IPPs, sure, private sector, what Shamini was talking about, private sector putting up its own RE, all takes us in the right direction for climate, but doesn't take us in the right direction always for electricity access for the poor. And Eskom has that mandate. So, if Eskom's electricity is cleaner and cleaner, that is brilliant news. But I really don't want us to get confused between local air pollution issues and climate change issues. So the local air pollution issues are important and I don't discount them. But climate change itself is a global and domestic health crisis. So, let us be very clear that our hope is that you, through getting involved in the renewable energy generation yourself, that you are able to accelerate that at such a pace that, as Mr. Fuzile was saying, you can review your decommissioning schedule over time. And let us hope the one really seriously overtakes the other. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments? Because the CEO is going to make his closing remarks now. Go ahead.
Chair, I think the councillor's comments are really relevant. There are difficult choices to make here. We acknowledge that as a utility. The choice to extend the operation was not taken quite lightly, and we understand the need to revisit that position on a much more frequent basis, considering the implications that have been expressed in this room, Chair. As I said, we've looked at all the key components of the national circumstances that we're dealing with, And difficult as it is, this is the choice that we found the most practical to approach. We will revisit and we will make some moves in the right direction as assumptions materialize otherwise. Chair, I also want to indicate that to Dr. Maserumule that we are actually engaging with DSI, Sanedi, with regards to that pilot project that was done. Our RT&D team is more focused now, Chair, on providing solutions to our operational and domestic challenges. This is the one shift that we're doing to the business. We must use our RT&D to solve our country problems. They've just came back from a study tour in China, because we also need to start looking at how others have done this without having to reinvent the wheel ourselves. And our big focal point is on addressing us, continue to improve on the issues of emissions from a fleet perspective. So more of our attention and resources is geared towards this kind of initiatives. And we intend to essentially take the first step that was done at the Kelvin Power Station to the next level of applicability into our own fleet. So we are talking to DSI.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have you answered all the questions? Okay, then you would know that we've had a Eskom person serving as a commissioner appointed by the president. Currently, we don't have that. We intend.
Chair, maybe you wait for the president to be appointed and then he appoints the chair.
That's the only reason why we don't have somebody. But in the meantime, I'd like to extend an invitation for you or somebody you wish to send to attend as a guest and to participate in the discussions, because I think that's important for us and probably for you. So feel free to attend, yeah. Okay, good. So let's break for tea now. And Nantlandla had allocated 15 minutes for tea. Am I correct? So we can come back then at 10:45 from tea break. Thank you. Chairman, stop being disruptive. Nonhlanhla has got an announcement to make.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, the people online are feeling left out and they're requesting that you please speak into the mic. The sound is very bad for the people online. Thank you very much.
Okay, Crispin, you want to introduce the next item?
Chair, I think the right person to introduce the next item is the chair of the M&E working group, Melissa Fourie.
All right, thanks. Good morning again, everyone. So I am presenting this in my capacity as chair of the M&E working group. We are very excited and proud to bring to the Commission today the first State of Climate Action report in South Africa. And we're bringing this to the Commission for approval today. The Commissioners would have seen it a few times before. I'll talk through the process of developing this report in a minute. So this report is the first, this is the next slide, please, the first assessment of climate action in South Africa. And it is a snapshot of our progress towards the achievement of certain key indicators. I will speak to those indicators in a minute that support the country staying on a pathway of reducing emissions on the one hand, enhancing climate resilience and improving lives and livelihoods. It focuses on where we've got progress we've already been made and then where the critical gaps are for action and what shifts will be required. The PCC intends making separate and subsequent recommendations regarding bridging these gaps and developing tracking benchmarks for future reports. One of those tracking benchmarks is from the monitoring, evaluation and learning framework that I referred to before the break. So obviously that's the kind of assessment that we want to feed into future reports with an increasing focus on justice. The next slide, please. So this is the process for developing the report. It's taken quite some time, probably around, gosh, I think close to a year that it's taken to develop this report. So assessing the progress against several priority indicators. You can have a look at the back of this report. There's a methodology attached, so you can see that for yourselves. And then reviewing available data up until the end of 2023. So the report is quite current, which is, I think, makes it exceptionally helpful and useful. We studied in this report the environment in which climate policy is made in South Africa, looking at various different aspects and the ways that they enhance and prevent progress. Interviewed experts to gather data, some of them in government, some of them outside. You will remember we reported previously on a social attitudes survey that had been conducted by the Human Sciences Research Council. And that data, which was a nationally representative survey on the just transition through 3,000 South Africans and their perceptions across the country. And that data also has fed into this report. And then we had peer review by about 40 experts. They're listed in the report. You can see they come from various stakeholder groups, but also from academia and that kind of technical expertise. And then, of course, commissioners. I've also seen, and we've had inputs from commissioners. So this is the outline of the report. I won't go through all the headings, but you can see that it broadly looks at the kind of context in which climate action takes place. Then it focuses on the climate resilience part with a special emphasis on agriculture and water. And we'll have some of our commissioners speak to those aspects just in a short while. And then the third part is about the mitigation part of climate action, and then focusing specifically on energy and transport. So key findings of this report. So the first really important finding is that we have strong commitments and public support for just transition and renewable energy. This is based on two major sub-findings. The first, of course, is the consistent progress that we've made with the work program of the Just Transition, the work of this commission, the Just Transition framework, and all the subsequent documents that we've adopted And then, of course, the climate change bill itself, which essentially for the first time entrenches the concept of just transition in our statutory framework. And then the second part is this social attitude survey of the Human Sciences Research Council, which shows very compellingly that more than half of South Africans believe that the transition could alleviate load shedding. More than 40% of South Africans think that a shift to cleaner forms of energy will help to reduce electricity costs and help the economy grow. And then thirdly, that South Africans are also generally in favor of stronger policies to support a just transition, including those related to economic diversification, education, training, reskilling, targeted employment opportunities for those affected by the transition. There's a previous slide I think we've missed now, the mismatch one, yes. The mismatch, so this is the second big finding of the report, is there's this mismatch between commitments and action. It's probably not entirely unfamiliar. South Africans, we tend to be very good at plans and not always so great at action. So despite the strong support and the policy commitments, we see a notable disparity between policy ambitions and practical outcomes. And the report ascribes it to a number of different things, but some of the key things that stand out are, first of all, contradictory public policies and positions regarding the future of the energy sector, and the way it's described here from the executive summary as government wrestles with immediate trade-offs between energy security, economic growth, the health impacts of pollution from fossil fuels and responding to climate risk, all the issues that we were just wrestling with in the previous session. Secondly, inadequate technical and financial capacity, special reference here to local governments who are the frontline responders to climate change and the just transition. And then thirdly, limited investment in the just transition from public, private, international, and domestic sources. And just to also emphasize that, of course, the finance pieces in this document comes from the Finance and Innovation Working Group's work on this and the Climate Finance Landscape Report, right? All right, then the next section on the race to build climate resilience. So of course, you know, we sit here having watched more floods and tornado and things hitting people who are already extremely vulnerable in KZN and Eastern Cape just in the past week. So we know only too well, and that social attitude survey also shows really clearly how South Africans are very familiar and understand that the climate is changing and that it's starting to impact them directly. We know that the food and water sectors are the most vulnerable to climate change. We're going to be touching on that in a minute with two of our commissioners. Our readiness to leverage public and private investment for adaptation action has decreased. Partly as a result of persistent social inequality, a complex business environment, declining state capacity, and fiscal space, I guess. And lastly, that we have national policies and commitments to deal with climate resilience and adaptation, but we can also see that only 28 of the 95 actions outlined by our National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy are actually fully implemented or currently being implemented. So there's a huge backlog in terms of adaptation. Then the third section, the race to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the report goes into a lot of detail on this. South Africa, as we all know, is the 14th largest global GHG emitter and the largest emitter on the African continent. And we know that our coal-based electricity generation, of course, accounts for more than half of our country's emissions. You see the number there for 2022. Our 2021 NDC update set a commitment those ranges are familiar to you. Remember the work we did in 2021 on the NDC. So for 2025, 398 to 510 megatons CO2 equivalent for 2025. And then for 2030, 350 to 420 megaton of CO2 equivalent. And then there's also the goal set for reaching net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. So what the report finds is that South Africa is on track to meet the 2025 GHG emission target. But we've now got the draft sectoral emissions target report from the DFFE and says that the low target of of the 2030 NDC could be achieved with more ambitious actions in the electricity and transport sectors. But it cautions, though, if key policies, this is from the SET report, not our report, SET report, that if key policies like the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan and that prescribed electricity build plan and decommissioning plan are not achieved, the 2030 target in the NDC is at risk. And this is a very critical thing for us as a commission to note. And we were just listening to the Eskom CE talking about the delay and the implications of that for our emissions. And it's not entirely clear whether that was appropriately assessed before that decision was made. All right, so we've now going to talk to, we've asked 4 of our commissioners to speak to various aspects of the report, just very briefly. They're not on our working group, so we're really grateful for them for stepping up and speaking to each of their fields of expertise. So I'm going to first turn to Commissioner Rabi, who's going to address agriculture.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, commissioners. From an agricultural point of view, the report is a sobering account of the factual situation surrounding agriculture and climate change in this country. We've spoken about what has recently happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape, but at the time of the drafting of the report, in November 2023, South Africa experienced the warmest November on record. Our February and March production periods, peak production periods for especially our staple grains and oilseeds commodity sectors, heat waves that were experienced in the central interiors had a devastating effect on commercial agriculture and specifically those staple commodities. What we should also not forget is that, when I'm going a little bit off script here, is that we should also not forget what has happened in our surrounding countries. Zambia, also a key cereal producing country or maize producing country, has had its production slashed in half due to heat waves, droughts. In Zimbabwe, similar situation, 2.7 million people are facing hunger. And these are sobering facts and figures that shouldn't be forgotten in the context of climate change and agriculture in particular in South Africa. What is welcomed about the report in particular is that it enshrines the role of small-scale farmers and the actions that need to be done with respect to small-scale farmers in furthering their resilience, the livelihoods, and the household food security that is needed and created by agriculture in the rural society. And obviously, in rural societies, agriculture plays a key role in ensuring food security. And that is vitally important. But we also know, and I said this in the beginning, is that we understand that there's a sobering account of the dualistic nature of agriculture in South Africa between a commercial sector and an upcoming or emerging sector. And there are huge disparities in agriculture and food production in that regard. An entrenched spatial, racial, and general inequality still exists. It needs to be addressed. The figures as those speak for themselves. I think the report also mentions that 77% of farmers generate 70% of the income from commercial agriculture in South Africa. That again is in itself an unsustainable figure and a potential risk for food security and food production in the country altogether. Land reform and climate smart agricultural practices are included and referred to in the report, and I think they vitally illustrate the necessity of achieving effective land reform and introducing climate smart agricultural practices to ensure that South Africa remains food secure in the face of adverse climate conditions and climate change being ever more prevalent in the country. I think I'll leave it at that, Melissa. I think there's been a lot said. What is particularly important for us is also the attention that was given to something that I've been pushing for a long time, and other commissioners with respect to the food, water, and energy nexus or interrelationship. And again, good factual information. Context is always important, and I think that is something that we'll work on in the future and as part of this commission. with respect to where agriculture comes from and the complexities and those interrelationships between food, water, and energy, as I said before. But from my side, also congratulations on a well-drafted report, certainly a snapshot and certainly a sobering one at that, and one that can be worked from in the future.
Right, thanks, Commissioner. Ravi, so talking of the food, energy, water nexus, we're going to next turn to Commissioner Adams to talk to us about the water aspects.
Thank you. I think from a zoomed out perspective, the report is very good, but that is not how we experience water, and that is not how we experience and should be experienced or implement adaptation, and that's not how you build resilience. So I think the report does well in giving the macro level and the macro issues. But you just need to switch on your TV to see that when we talk about these average numbers, it does not make a lot of sense. So, for example, we know that by 2030, we estimate that there will be a 30% supply and demand gap under a do-nothing scenario. But we know that then is expressed as a range. It can go from 0 to 80%. So which I think the report picks up very well is this unequal or unequal access to water and services. But what's more worrying is that climate change is experienced mostly through water. Just think about how we experience energy security, food security, etc., and the centrality of water. So there's an interesting quote somewhere that I read, that water is to adaptation what energy is to mitigation. But then the report is brave enough to say that mitigation has received 81% of funding and adaptation only 12%. Only 7% dual benefits. And I think this is part of the problem that we're experiencing in South Africa, whether it's service, delivery, etc. So mitigation is there, but where people live and how they experience climate change and the environment is where we are not investing enough. So, so that it's highly skewed, and I think that needs to and because we also deal with this within a narrowing window of opportunity, because besides climate change, we have, and I think the report also articulate this well, is the governance problems that we experience, the funding problems, Melissa called some of them the mismatch between different sectors, because water is also not just a water sector, it's also part of the energy sector, part of the food sector, etc. So I think the report might benefit from evaluating that, not maybe as a second iteration in the nexus issues. The nexus issues can be around the ecosystem, not just water, energy, and food, which is the popular one. There's a whole shopping list of them that we need to look at it. But then again, which I found interesting is around the survey and how we try to estimate what's people's perception of a variety of things, most notably just transition. But I think part of the behavior issue is also how we manage water, but also how we use water. We on the user side and they implement well, so just issues around awareness that drives behavior change. So for example, if I go around the room and I say, but what's your per capita use per month or per day in your household? Can you give me that number? That is how we change behavior, etc. And then that's what we, and of course, maybe just some of the things that we need to do, and I think that's probably is mentioned in the report, but I think we need to distill it about digitized, but we also need to decentralize. And I think the report mentions it because the only way that you're going to deal with this unequal access is not that everyone should, there will hopefully a pipeline from a bulk resource will reach you somewhere out in the sticks. It's never going to happen. I think that is part of the problem so we need to decentralize. And I'll tell you a trick. So my background, is in hydrogeology. So I'm a groundwater person. So and I learned to do this now after I read the report. Then I search for groundwater, and it's mentioned twice in this chapter, and not within the context of that it supplies 13% of this country's water, but 56% of the population. And it's totally missing. It has this bulk focus of that everything will come from the Vaal system or the Western Cape system, etc. But where do 56% of the people in this country get their water from? Is from a local resource. And then you then ask me, how many people in how many municipalities in this country employs hydrogeologists? 2. So then you ask, how are we going to fix this problem? There's your problem. So I think these some of the, and then of course, decarbonization is not just the energy issue. Even that 2% that's mentioned in the report must also find expression in water. Because this is how we all get used to it. It's not just it must be an energy problem. So, Chair, overall, I think the report captures the macro issues, but I think if we want to start dealing with this policy-rich, implementation poor problem, we need to drill down to where people actually live and experience water. So let me stop there. I've got a whole shopping list. It's fine. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner Adams. That really sets the tasks for us for the next phase of this work. So thanks very much for pointing that out. I do recall a report talking about protection of strategic water source areas. That's a project that many of us have been working on for a long time, and that covers fresh and groundwater. So, I mean, surface and groundwater. All right, so we're now turning to the mitigation part. Apologies, Commissioner Matlana. I see we had a senior moment with that slide we put up and left your name out by mistake. So we're going to first turn to Commissioner Matlana to talk to us about mitigation overall.
Thanks, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. After reading the mitigation section of the report, I'm just going to share 3 points, just 3 points that I could pull out from. The first one is on emission trends and drivers. And we all know that the GHG emission profile of South Africa is dominated by the energy sector. What I liked, Melissa, in this report was that they highlighted very briefly, but very importantly, that the agriculture sector contributes about 12% of the national GHG emission profile. That's important. It's important because it's on an increase. If you look at it in a time series, the contribution of the agricultural sector is increasing. However, the quantification, the estimation of the uncertainty of the emissions from the agricultural sector is important to note. So whilst we are focusing on the emissions from energy, which we should, my view is that we should not forget about what's happening in the land use change sector, so that we have a better picture of the national emissions profile. So that's the first part that I liked about this report. The second part is the messaging part, is the messaging issue, which is South Africa is on target to reach its 2030 commitment. So if we move on to mitigation commitments. So that's the second thing that I want to mention is that South Africa is on target to reach the lower end of its mitigation target. There's a rider though that goes with that commitment in that now that we are setting the next NDC target, we are expected to be more ambitious. It's important to note that there is an expectation that although we are on track to meet the 2030 target, there's a risk about meeting the subsequent targets. Therefore, it's important that in this NDC that we're going to submit next year, we show an ambitious commitment. And lastly, on meeting the mitigation commitments, the report mentions that there are 3 major sectors that we need to pay clear attention to. If South Africa is to meet its future commitments, meaning its future NDC commitments, we need to pay a specific attention to 3 core sectors. One is electricity, one is industry, which is dominated by Sasol, and the third one is transport. Again, if you look closely at the time series of transport emissions in South Africa, it's one of those interesting sectors that, in my view, we are struggling to mitigate emissions from transport sector, and they are on the upward trend. And this is evident in the numbers that are generated by DFFE in the GHG inventory. So these are the 3 sectors that we need to look at if we are going to meet our commitments in the future. Electricity, industry, when you say industry, think of Sasol, and thirdly, transport. Thanks, Minister.
Thanks, Commissioner Mantlana. Commissioner Nadia, you're going to talk about energy supply. Thanks.
Thank you. So congratulations to the drafters and the shepherders of this report. It's very exciting because, you know, it provides in the energy space a one-stop shop where you can now go and look up all the information and you don't have to go and dig into the greenhouse gas inventory every time. It's all there for us. So I also want to make 4 points. One more than because 78% of South Africa's emissions come from the energy sector. And of that 78, 40% of that is from electricity. That provides South Africa with an enormous opportunity to really drastically and easily, you know, reduce our emissions and at a pace and scale that meets South Africa's fair share of what is required globally. And I just want to underline that word fair again, because as a developing country, which doesn't make an enormous contribution to global emissions, you know, it is our fair share that we must commit to, not more than that, not necessarily. And, you know, not because we've made promises at the United Nations, but because cutting emissions is the only way to reduce climate changes, which we can see are destroying developmental gains we have made as a country and which are hitting the poor the hardest. So if that's the really big opportunity we have, there are good initiatives happening in government and the private sector to reduce emissions from the energy sector, but we are not wholeheartedly grasping this opportunity. And that, you know, is seen in the report in the policy, so the section on policy dislocations. It's seen in the report on the progress on renewables and progress on phasing down and ultimately out fossil fuels. So the report uses 4 indicators to look at progress on mitigation in the energy sector. And those are the indicators and graphs in the report that show us where we are and what needs to happen with renewables, energy storage, because with renewables, you must have the energy storage piece of the picture, coal and fossil gas. So, those are things we will track over time in the report, but the information is there for us. Right, so I would argue that, the report also looks into all the policy instruments that are happening in the energy sector and so on. I would motivate that we need to do an integrated energy plan, which is in legislation, and attempts have been made a couple of times by DMRE to do a sort of draft version of this. But we need an integrated energy plan because energy carriers are nowadays doing different duties than they used to do. So, there's industrial use of energy, there's electricity for mobility, there's all kinds of the energy landscape is changing, and we need an overall integrated energy plan before, and then out of that, we devolve an electricity plan like the IRP and so on. And we need to do an IEP that seeks to meet the demand and reach net zero emissions by 2050. We know where we must end up. We must plan how to get there. And in the process, we must consider the land and water footprint of energy supply. What we've learned, this is my last, what we've learned from what happened at Komati coal-fired power station and the livelihoods depend upon it, is that we must front load the justice in the transition before phasing down and ultimately phasing out fossil fuel. And what does this mean? It means to grow new climate smart industries, economic diversification and job creation within and beyond the energy sector. Job intensity is key. And I think, there's often a shift towards mechanization in various kinds of economic activities. I understand that private sector is driven by, the need to deliver profit, return on investment. But in a country with such high unemployment, I think we always have to look for the job-intensive method of doing our process. Okay, so that's the first thing, is growing new climate-smart industries. And the second thing is having a path for every person whose livelihood depends upon fossil fuels, for them to make a living going forward. And the last part, I think, of this piece around the energy sector and front-loading the justice is passing along the cost savings that renewable energy offers to poor people through a greater free basic electricity allocation and cheaper electricity. And it is a pity that the report has nothing to say about this aspect, although it does indicate that in future reports there will be an indicator around energy access. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Nadir. Look, the report doesn't have everything in it. I think we understand that. Another big area of work lies around energy efficiency, which can have a huge impact for emissions, for job creation. So this also requires a lot more attention, not just in future reports, but in our actual work program. Okay, our last, Deputy Chair, our last input is from actually somebody who is on our monitoring evaluation working group, Commissioner Lokela. She's going to talk about transport.
Thank you, Melissa. So I think growing from the report, I think in the report, we clearly acknowledge the fact that both the transport and automotive sectors contribute in terms of employment and economy towards South Africa. But while we acknowledge that, we recognize that both these sectors contribute significantly in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so there is a need for us to focus on both decarbonization of the two sectors as well as just transition. But I think what is important in the report is that we also emphasize the fact that as we look into transition, that transition must be looked into, or it must be considered in the context of the fact that the public transport system is plagued with a number of challenges, including accessibility, affordability, as well as safety challenges. So all of those challenges will have to be addressed as we look into transition. But on the other hand, you look into the automotive sector, it also has its own challenges. It is really faced with significant transition risks as your major export markets are set to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, I think around 2035. So there's a lot of transition risks that this sector will have to deal with. So all of those challenges will then have to be considered in terms of the transition. But I think across all the 5 indicators that were considered in the report, that will help drive decarbonization as well as just transition. I think we've seen progress. I mean, one of the indicators that the report talks to is the number of public road transport vehicles. And I think in there, we quote a study that was done by NBI in 2022, where it is clearly articulated that the current number that we have will have to be doubled by 2050 for us to improve the decarbonization in this sector. So while there is progress, it is acknowledged that this progress will have to be accelerated. But coupled with that, there is one indicator that talks to private ownership of vehicles. And this is highly linked to the public transport system. As we improve on that system, then ultimately we'll start seeing the decline in terms of private ownership of vehicles. There's 2 other indicators that talk to new energy vehicles. So we're seeing improvement, slight improvement in terms of share of sale into the new energy vehicles. Also coupled with that, as we ramp up the EVs, there will be a need to ramp up on the enabling infrastructure, your charging, your public charging stations. But I think on the public charging stations also, it is important to note that those stations will then have to be powered with reliable as well as decarbonized electricity, just so that we don't move a few steps backwards. But I think overall, the report clearly articulates that there is improvement in this sector, although we will have to accelerate. I think both on the EVs as well as the infrastructure, there is indication of potential acceleration as long as we can focus on targeted policies that will ensure that these new vehicles are affordable and they are at least cheaper than your internal combustion energy vehicles. But I think overall, the report mainly looks at your passenger transportation, but we do acknowledge that pride also has a role to play in terms of decarbonizing the transport sector. And I think this is something that we will probably unpack further in the next phase of the report. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lokele. So Deputy Chair, this is the end of our presentation. We just wanted to add, well, first of all, a huge thanks to everyone for just making these remarks, but everybody who's worked on the report, particularly the team in the Secretariat who worked incredibly hard on this report. The plan is to launch this report formally on the 17th of July. And obviously we would encourage all commissioners to participate and join for that launch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you to everybody. I think this is a phenomenal achievement. It's really big and ambitious. Very bold also, and I think it's a balanced report, and I see it as something that would serve as a reference for many people in South Africa, many people in different institutions, government departments, private sector, and also internationally for that matter. So well done on everybody who's done that. Have we already adopted it, Melissa? Must I put it formally for adoption? Thank you very much for your support. It's adopted, Melissa. You want to say something?
Chair, if I could pose the question, which is, when do you want to launch?
She said 17th of July.
Oh,
she already
is that a done day? Okay, sorry.
I don't know. When do you want to do it?
No, 17th of July is a good day.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine, Deputy Chair. The 17th of July is the day before Mandela Day.
Thank you. Let me welcome Minister Pravin Gordhan, who's joined us quietly, sitting at the back. Nontlantla is not happy. She said you mustn't sit at the back. I don't know. She wants you, your name tag is here. Well, you heard Nontlantla. She thought you will be less difficult at this stage in your career, but I told her she's underestimating you. Okay, let's go on then to the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. Who's starting, Shamini or Deepak? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So it gives me great pleasure today to present the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. As I said earlier, this is quite a pinnacle piece of work for the Finance Working Group. It really does set in place the platform, the mechanism, the strategy around how to enable climate financial flows to the projects where they need to go and the architecture behind this. So I just wanted to, before we start, is to just apologize on behalf of the DG. He's running a bit late, but he should be 5 minutes away. So he should join us. He will be offering some reflections at the end of the presentation. Happy with that? I think the presentation we can get
You want to
through.
go ahead? Okay, go.
Yeah, I think so. Let's do that. All right, so if we move on to the next slide, I just want to introduce how we're going to run this session. So basically, it's structured around the journey that we've taken, the process, and then we're going to go into the functions of the Just Transition Mechanism. And thereafter, we will speak and spend a lot of time on the recommendations and the stakeholder consultations that resulted in those recommendations. So we've got myself who will introduce, and then Commissioner Zama who will come in. Thereafter, I'm going to hand to the Secretariat, and Deepak and Kwesi, who really led us to this point, are going to take us through the real meat of the conversation. But before I do that, I think it'll be remiss of me not to introduce what is the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. And I raise this point because it's important, because this sort of mechanism and the thinking around it has evolved over the journey that we've taken for over 2 years. We really wanted to go gung-ho and really put forward a platform that's functional and that's already housed within an institution. And through the consultations and the rich discussions, we came to a point where we now define it as a cohesive strategy for raising and channeling funds towards the just transition, while providing an institutional capability for learning by doing and implementing lessons as knowledge on just transition financing increases. And I think that's really important because this is something we're learning by doing. We've never done something like this before. We have a number of barriers around just transition financing and why we've never seen it flow in the manner that it should. And this allows us to start thinking about it in a cohesive way. So if we move on to the next slide, I just want to touch on a little bit about the barriers. And well, actually the process first and some of the barriers that we're actually looking at. So how did we get here? I mentioned earlier when I gave my feedback on the working group that the process was quite lengthy and we've spent quite a lot of time on this. But effectively, the PCC, under its mandate to coordinate and advise on a just transition in South Africa, has led a conceptualization process to design and develop this mechanism that really addresses the scale and urgency of the just transition. The process was started about 2 years ago, already in October 2022, so it's been a long journey. It started with the release of a request for proposals. We undertook in-depth research and analysis, long consultative process with social partners, and I think that's very important to understand, through public and bilateral discussions. So it wasn't just one-on-one, we had public sessions as well. And finally, we landed on the recommendations report that has then benefited significantly from the rich contributions provided by stakeholders and through the deep working group discussions, written comments. This document was released for public comment, and further bilateral engagements that followed to get us to this final report that you see before you today. So those that have traveled the journey of developing the report, both within the PCC and more broadly within the constituencies, have been part of an evolution of thinking and learning that will helpfully move us from strength to strength as we look to operationalize the transition mechanism. So why are we doing this? We move to the next slide. I do want to highlight some of the barriers that we are aiming to address here. There's a number of systemic issues. I just want to welcome the DG who's just arrived. Welcome, DG. Okay, there's a number of systemic issues that we are trying to address through the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. Now, these range from conceptual to market to structural barriers, but really they can be grouped into 3 overarching barriers. The absence of a universally accepted definition of what is the just transition, resulting in various interpretations of an understanding of what should be included in financing and what not. And then there's a lack of a viable project pipeline, coupled with insufficient project preparation support. You will recall that earlier when I gave my feedback on the working group, we spoke about developing a project pipeline. This is a critical issue. There aren't enough projects at the level where it's needed at workers and communities. And so this is really also what we're trying to do, is develop a project pipeline. And then there's a discernible mismatch between available funding sources and the specific requirements of just transition projects as well as programs. So really at this point, what we're trying to do is encapsulate all of this into a financing mechanism that really gets to the heart of what we are trying to do as the Commission. With that, I'd like to hand to Commissioner Zama, who's going to take us through now what are the functions of financing mechanism.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'm not. Okay, now I am. Okay, let me lean into it. Yes, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be part of the team that is presenting the JTFM. So having identified the barriers that exist and the challenges in the previous slide that has been covered, we then identified some of the functions that can address these challenges. The first of which being mobilizing and aggregating funding. Funding mobilization should also be accompanied by the development of innovative financial instruments, and the aim is to raise funds for these projects and potentially aggregate smaller projects and create more attractive investment opportunities. The other function is matchmaking, which we identified as a vital function of mobilizing funding, is the ability to match that funding that's been mobilized with the suitable projects that have been identified. So when we talk about the projects themselves, we identified that another critical aspect or function is project preparation and development is critical to the development of viable just transition project pipeline. And this can be achieved through supporting the ideation, the technical and market assessments of these projects, capacity building and stakeholder engagement, right up to assisting with implementation plans of some of these just transition projects. In looking at these projects, a critical aspect as well is project assessment, using the suggested criteria of looking at the potential impact that the projects will deliver, the financial sustainability of the project, the related risk assessment, the innovation and scalability of the project, and also the extent of community involvement as well. We also identified blending and structuring to be an important function here so that we can be able to attract a diverse range of investors that can provide grants, debt, and equity funding to deliver optimal blended funding and optimal funding costs related to these projects. And lastly, collaboration, reflecting and learning to serve as a nexus for various stakeholders as well. If you can move to the next slide. So the JTFM will act as a key node in a broader transition landscape, and it also highlights the interplay between the various functions that I've highlighted as well in order to catalyze broader system level change in the financial ecosystem and cater to the needs and challenges that we've identified in the just transition. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the supports that the JTFM encapsulates in scaling these projects. And you will see how the various functions of the JTFM, from project origination to assessment to prep, matchmaking, and blending and structuring the funding, will then lead to the just transition impact, which can be reviewed and adjusted over time. And what we want to highlight is that this will be mobilized and will be mobilizing and aggregating finance and developing a national strategy around that, and aims to foster collaboration between the developers, the finance sector, and all other stakeholders. Thank you. I'll hand over to Kwesi, guys.
Thank you, Chair. I take over from this point and talk to some of the stakeholder engagement. But at the very beginning, let me say that this does not speak to climate finance in whole. It doesn't speak to, generally speaking, transitional finance. It speaks particularly, Chair, to those very difficult to finance just transition projects, which must accompany our just transition journey. So this doesn't talk to a silver bullet that deals with all of climate finance. That was quite an important topic of discussion in the course of the last year, where if we look at the hierarchies of finance and where this is located, this sits as a very specific intervention or intervention strategy and development strategy that ensures, Chair, that no one gets left behind in this transition. So I just wanted to clarify that. As the team went through the work on the basis of desktop analysis as well as fairly rigorous assessment of the landscape in South Africa, we were aiming for, as Shamini put it, a singular institutional structure. However, as we engaged both with the ecosystem as well as with stakeholders, it became clear that there was no precedent, certainly in South Africa, but there's also no precedent for this kind of work in a coherent way abroad. So we're really charting new territory and new learning. And therefore, through the stakeholder engagement in particular, as a result of engaging with partners who felt that a top-down approach to this question would in fact not work, we came to the conclusion that we needed to adopt not only a participatory, but an evolutionary approach to developing the capacity through an ecosystem in South Africa of all existing institutions that are involved, as well as with stakeholders charting the way forward through a process, as Shamini has also indicated, of learning by doing and then iterating that process over time. And so I needed to say that the stakeholder engagement has been very comprehensive. As the ED mentioned in his report, we met with the COSATU Climate Change Committee twice in fairly intensive sessions. Of course, we couldn't take on board all of the comments made by stakeholders. However, in 3 respects, stakeholders have made an invaluable contribution to the development of this report. Firstly, the point I made already, that is, this needs to evolve if it is to address the question of communities and workers in a participatory way. Secondly, that institutions that we saw as being quite critical to this ecosystem themselves needed to undergo a learning and transformative process as they brought to bear their internal capabilities. And then finally, Chair, as you've also pointed out, the availability of suitable financing, particularly grant financing, needed to be explored in a way that goes beyond what I would call an insufficient contribution of grants in the JET-P package that has been negotiated. So all of these things need to evolve over time. We've taken on board a final comment from stakeholders that resonated with us, and that is introduced a bottom-up approach to project development, a bottom-up approach to project generation as well. And Chair, that sets then the stage for, next slide, please. Those are the stakeholder comments that we received and incorporated into the report. Next slide, please. And this sets the stage then for an evolutionary approach to the functional areas that Commissioner Zama has enunciated. The important thing to understand here is that these various functions are currently in one way or the other conducted in the ecosystem by various parties, by various stakeholders, as well as various institutions. And we have engaged in our bilateral process each of these specific stakeholders to ensure that we then produce a coherent narrative as well as a coherent process through which each of these stakeholders will play their part. Next slide, please. And here we decided, Chair, that we're going to use one of your very wise and illustrious quotes to ensure that the message of what we're trying to achieve through this just transition financing mechanism is not lost. I will now hand over to Kwezi, who has very capably shepherded this process to go into the very specific recommendations that we are making, some of them quite targeted, some of them evolutionary, as I indicated, in nature. And there's a message in each one of these recommendations for either our social partners or our development finance institutions, or in one case, our national treasury.
Thank you, Deepak, and greetings to the Deputy Chair, to all the commissioners, the Executive Director, and the Secretariat as a whole. My name is Kwezikazi Vantful, and I am the Manager for Municipal Project Finance at the PCC Secretariat. And I will be presenting to you the final recommendations that have emanated from the stakeholder inputs, consultations, and feedback from commissioners, as well as the Climate Finance and Innovation Working Group. So I will be taking you through the recommendations, which I would just like to highlight are divided into 3 categories. These categories are essentially what can be done immediately, followed by those recommendations that would take learnings from this initial process into an evolution of this mechanism. And then finally, those recommendations that speak to a broader lens of the just transition from a macro perspective and what can be done to ensure that the support of alternative economic futures in spatially or sector-based risk areas. In category 1, and to address the fractured and fragmented low levels of funding flows to projects and programs on the ground, the PCC recommends that the implementation of the JET-IP PMU funding platform is used as a first step in the conceptualization of a more permanent and multi-institutionalized matchmaking and project preparation mechanism. Secondly, as the JTFM is implemented through a process of learning and institutional development, the funding platform must explore avenues through which SMME support and development can be achieved by the use of grants and concessional funding in the JET-P package. Thirdly, leveraging the rich ecosystem of development finance institutions that already exist within our country, we are recommending that as the funding platform evolves, these DFIs, such as the IDC, the DBSA, the NEF, etc., use their existing capacity of functions such as project development and preparation, SMME and municipal support, and the blending and structuring of finance to develop a cohesive strategy to eventually take up and enhance JTFM functions in the longer term. Fourthly, understanding the complexity that this may present, given the different mandates that these DFIs may have, we recommend that they undergo a process of alignment and transformation to ensure integration of the principles of the just transition for scalable impact. These recommendations, therefore, have evolved in the initial phase to present a more decentralized and evolving JTFM, which will entail critical actions to be undertaken, including the development of a strategy for mobilizing and aggregating finance, the collaboration of actors to identify structuring, blending, and matchmaking challenges as faced by the funding platform, and thereafter, in the next 18 to 24 months, a recommendation to institute a review process that will allow us to establish a more evidence-based framework to then familiarize and formalize an institutional structure and identify new and emerging functional gaps and how they can best be addressed. I would also like to point out that this 18 to 24-month review point does tie in very well with the mid-way review of the JET-P, so it is by design. In the second category, next slide, please. Oh, thank you. In this category of recommendations, which is the second one, we are talking to as the more centralized entity emerges, how our recommendation is that this mechanism must be firmly grounded in the principles of inclusivity, transparency, with accountability and oversight measures. To that effect, we make the following recommendations. Firstly, that a co-design process with stakeholders will then define the appropriate institutional governance structures that is fit for purpose and accepted at the level of implementation. And here we're talking about communities, municipalities, provincial and national governments. Secondly, that the PCC must convene a private finance implementation task force to ensure the socialization of these just transition imperatives and providing support to hopefully shift the private sector's position to be more responsive to the just transition. Thirdly, in responding to stakeholder calls for a clearer and more structured process in our commitment to procedural justice, we recommend that the development and the publishing of a stakeholder engagement charter is also undertaken. Lastly, on this section, there is a recommendation for the PCC and the JET-IP PMU to convene an expert group to analyze the findings from current research and to test and validate a consolidated project assessment framework. There is a general consensus that in these initial stages, rather than having an untested and possibly exclusionary project assessment tool, we rather focus on originating and aggregating as many projects as possible. This will ensure that we have sufficient data collection to refine as a more robust and evidence-based assessment tool is developed. The last set of recommendations, as mentioned before, focuses on the macroeconomic interventions and those sectoral risks that need support for alternative economic futures and locally led economic diversification. As such, the PCC recommends that despite the current fiscal constraints, the role of public finance is of utmost importance. And as such, the National Treasury should undertake a fiscal review to analyze the existing programs and public finance towards the just transition. It should also evaluate the potential for the reorientation of existing grants and spending towards addressing just transition needs. The National Treasury should also develop its climate budget tagging framework for public expenditure while harmonizing and integrating just transition aspects into the green finance taxonomy. Another critical recommendation is that consideration must be given to assessing the potential and the role of public finance in de-risking just transition projects and the development of incentives and other mechanisms to support the just transition. In terms of the international partners, the PCC recommends that these partners are encouraged to make new and additional funding for the just transition needs across the spectrum of investment, paying sufficient attention to community and worker-led initiatives. These partners must also explore and deliver innovative and creative approaches to grant financing, ensuring that these grants can be used effectively to support, de-risk, and scale just transition projects. So just paying attention to not just the quantity of finance, but the quality as well. And then last but definitely not least, the PCC recommends a bottom-up approach to project origination, where support is given to communities, civil society, and labor-led initiatives to conceptualize, develop, and originate feasible projects. Examples that we have included in our final report include the Community Just Transition Fund and the Partnership Implementation Model, which is being developed and piloted in parallel by the Employment Strategy Unit of the PCC. We believe that these vehicles can be key for catalytic community-owned and locally led projects and could be scaled up through the JTFM function. In closing, and as we reach finality to what has been a very long and winding road to realize this JTFM, I would like to leave you all with a quote from Norman Vincent Peale, which says, "Action is a great restorer and builder of confidence. Inaction is not only the result, but the cause of fear. Perhaps the action you take will be successful. Perhaps different actions or adjustments will have to follow. But any inaction is better than no inaction at all." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kwesi, and thank you to the team. Chair, if you'll let me, I'd like to now invite the DG of National Treasury to come through and provide his reflections, after which we can take some discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having us here today. And let me thank the PCC for the excellent work they've done in this area. We've been engaging with them quite regularly over the last number of weeks and months. And it's good to see this work finally come to fruition. So well done to the team. Let me perhaps, I'm going to try to stick to about 5 minutes or so. Let me make a few broad remarks, and then I'll get into the specific recommendations that are mentioned there, because I do want to reflect on some of the other issues before I get to the Treasury specific recommendations. Deepak said there was one for the Treasury, but I counted 4. So I'll get to those. I want to start just talking about some of the broader work we're doing, and start firstly with the issue of the project pipeline and origination. there was a slide earlier there that spoke to who originates. And I think one of the key focus areas that we have to think about when we think about JET-P is the issue of how do we build a better and more robust project pipeline. And that starts with the question, who originates the project? Municipalities originate projects that contribute to JET-IP, so do state-owned entities, so do line departments, and so on and so forth. And so the question is, how do we strengthen the capability of those institutional structures in order to deliver the kind of project pipeline that we expect? And I think one of the challenges that we've had, in particular in this space, is that the quality of the project pipeline has not been sufficient before one can get to the subsequent issues. A lot of the work that we've done more broadly on infrastructure in the last few months, but with relation and with relevance to JET-IP, is how do we strengthen the ability of, in particular, municipalities and state-owned companies to produce the right quality of project pipeline. Then, of course, that then links to the second issue is once you've got the pipeline, how does one then think about financing it, and what is the role of the government in supporting the financing of these projects, including crowding the private sector in to some of these projects. And of course, that goes to the instruments that you have available, as well as the way in which these projects are structured in order to crowd in other sources of funding. I've been quite, I think the JET-IP and the country platform is a very good mechanism to bring new and innovative financing ideas to the table. I've been quite disappointed that globally, I think there's quite a lack of innovation in this area. And I think that through the PCC, we need to, and the work of the Treasury and others, we need to think about how do we continue to innovate. Some of the work that we are currently doing in this area in preparation for the medium-term budget policy statement is we are working on a blended risks sharing financing platform where you bring in entities like MEGA and others that can de-risk financing through the guarantee and other facilities that they have. And we are designing a pilot in particular for transmission along these lines. Secondly, we have now transitioned to ring-fenced financing and borrowing for infrastructure and for just energy transition infrastructure in particular. That kind of ring fencing is something that we are experimenting with for the first time now, because typically the funding that we raise and the borrowing that we incur would go into the fiscal framework. But we are now, in order to crowd in new sources of innovative financing, we are now ring fencing that finance in order to allow it to be dedicated to particular JET projects and to allow it to be able to be combined and blended with other sources of funding. And then we are also working on a mechanism, dedicated financing mechanisms to crowd the private sector into some of these funding. And Lungisa's here, others are here. The appetite of the private sector to invest and co-invest in these projects is enormous, provided we are able to come up with the right kind of structures, and provided we are able to, as the government, to the extent that these are blended finance projects, able to come up with the appropriate de-risking mechanisms. The final broad point I want to make is we are also in a fortunate position where we are going into the G20 next year. And there are a lot of topics in the finance track of the G20 in particular that has enormous bearing for the discussions that we are having today. issues of multilateral development bank reform. I saw it on the screen there is very critical because the MDBs have a very important role to play in supporting, in particular, the financing mechanisms for the just energy transition. Other issues around sustainable finance and the innovations that are required there is a very important topic that the G20 has driven for a number of years, and that's been prioritized by the current presidency, the Brazilian presidency, and we have an opportunity to pick up on that momentum and take that forward and make that a key issue for our presidency as well. So I think part of what we need to reflect on as a collective is how do we use this opportunity of getting the right people who think about these complex global finance challenges into the same room and into South Africa so that we can drive some of these issues. Then just very quickly on the recommendations, I think an assessment of the funding for JET, I think that is something that is certainly supported from our side and something that our technical team has already started looking at. Climate budget tagging, we've already started and wish to conclude that process in the current year. And of course, the green taxonomy, we were one of the first countries, certainly in the emerging market space, to publish our own green taxonomy. And to the extent that amendments to that are required, as suggested along these lines, that's certainly something we can look at. So I would say those areas are broadly supported from our side, and we I look forward to continue to engaging the PCC on those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DG, and thank you for those insights as well, and very promising to hear all of the different initiatives currently underway with the National Treasury. I think, Chair, that brings us to the end of the presentation. We would like to take some points of discussion or questions, if anyone has them, and I can hand back to you. I think, Chair, we are looking for adoption of the report, so if we can make that firmly a request at the end. Thank you.
You want to say something? Nothing.
No, Chair, I think the team's done a remarkable job, and well done to all of them. And I really want to appreciate the DG joining us and giving us his reflection. I mean, it's thrilling to watch this, rather comprehensive climate finance strategy emerging out of the Treasury system. And I think we're very gratified for his remarks around these recommendations. It seems that the team has crafted the recommendations well, otherwise Duncan would have objected.
Just 2 points. The one is that we must just remember that this just transition financing mechanism speaks to all dimensions of the just transition, not just the energy piece. So it's not just about the JET-IP, but about much broader issues and dimensions. And then the second point is, one of the privileges, Deputy Chair, of serving as a commissioner is one gets to be in the room with persons such as yourself, Mr. Professor. And in terms of these innovative financing vehicles.
It's Dr. Peterson. Bongisa actually took his name tag. Yeah, he scratched out the Mr. and corrected the title.
My apologies, Dr. Peterson. It's not in this document at all, but one of the things that I think we should be considering is the idea of debt for climate swaps. Because as much as the international partner group countries want to give us money, to foster our energy transition, they also make noises about how they don't have money and they can't give grants and whatever. Well, they can just write off some of the debt.
Good. I don't want any more people to be praising the presence of the DG gets paid to do this sort of stuff. This is paid work. They make like you're doing them a favor. Look, I think I want to just echo what Crispian has said. You can see the power of this work if the Treasury gets fully immersed and involved in it. And the presence of the DG gives me a good opportunity to make this point, and also the fact that we are in transition from one administration to another. That the question of climate change in government is something that it's very important to work out where it should be in the structure and organogram of government. The global experience of success here is that it goes into those government entities that deal with development. You see, the environmental question is a simple one. Are we behaving in a matter that's causing climate change, and climate change is going to cause havoc? That's the only environmental question which has been answered. There's nothing else to answer as far as this is concerned, no debate. But transitioning from where we are as a high emissions economy to a low emissions economy is not an environmental question. There's no environmental issue involved there. You know, it's a developmental, financing, it's infrastructure, et cetera, those are the things. And when you wholly place the transition matter in the Department of Environment, what you're doing is you're ghettoizing it and you're making it not work. Basically, you're giving a very important matter uphill, because I can tell you here, because we're in a transition, that you are here. The DG of the Department of Environment has not been here since we set up the PCC, not once. Not even a deputy DG, because actually it doesn't matter. They're not involved in it. This is not their issue. So you place it in a wrong place. And the only place that a department, an environment department, can raise this matter is in international fora, you know, because there's many in multilateral organized, which is important in itself. But we kill the issue when we deal with it as a matter that's coming from Europe. Because the minister who's sitting over there at the very first meeting said, we're not going to be dictated to by the imperialist on what to do. He sounded very left-wing, because he is. And he was correct on that matter. And so when you only look at it through the lens of multilateralism, that's what's going to happen. So government needs to look at this thing. One of the things that, you know, you are the biggest procurer in the country. I think you buy goods and services worth about 2.2 trillion rands. What's the number? 2.4 trillion rands now, your budget. So I'm putting it loosely. And surely with that, one can drive development agendas if one wants to. So at various sorts of levels. Say, so for example, all these many people who ask you for money, you've got to give them money. Government departments want more money. I know all the things that you pull your hair out on. This man has got no hair left as a result of which. If you simply attach your allocations to certain climate targets, the most basic one of which is, tell us by how much you're going to reduce your energy content of your work. If you're going to reduce it by 5% or 7% or 10%, you probably, of that 2, whatever trillion rands, you probably spend a lot of that money on energy. So there's a direct rands and cents benefit for you. You're going to end up with a bit of spare cash. If you say whatever I don't know how much you spend on it, but if you tell these people that your budget has got conditionality on that, because it's like sort of anecdotally, you can see that state-funded entities don't care about their energy efficiency. Whereas talk to any household, middle class or working class, they actually care about their energy efficiency, because it costs so much to pay for energy right now. So those are the simple sort of things. Now, I'm making this point because it can't be driven just from the Environment Department. They've got their own work cut out, and they do a very good job at that. So in many countries, DTI has taken charge of climate. So you would get trade and climate, or you would get something of that sort. And this is something that you need to think about. It may even be that the whole climate issue needs to be disaggregated in some sort of sense. But a bit of thinking, I think, in the state, it's time to do that kind of thing. I'm just taking advantage of your presence here to make that point, and also taking advantage of the presence that no minister can take offense, because everything's up in the air right now. You can't normally reallocate functions in government, as you know, without it being highly political. But a good case can be made. So if you talk about a just energy, think about this, the Just Energy Fund. What was it called initially when there was the 100?
The JP.
The JP or whatever. And you could, in the end, they then said, okay, put it to the presidency to deal with the matter. So old Dix, who comes here very often, and as you know, he's very clever, and he cuts through a lot of red tape and those sorts of things. But it wasn't really a red tape issue. It was a question of the Environment Department didn't have the wherewithal to do with this, but it couldn't go to any other department because of, political competition. So it goes to the presidency. And the presidency's actual capacity is limited. I mean, they're there to cut through red tape, not to actually run multi-year long programs. That must be run by government departments and proper institutions as such. The presidency these days to cut through the crap, because they can do it. They've got the support of the president to do it and that sort of stuff. Just leave it. In many other jurisdictions, climate change and energy is together. You had Louise made the point here that 70% of our climate change issues related to energy in one way or another. And you've got now the energy department, the energy minister and all that. Really, they're just exasperated. They come here and everybody's talking about their work, without them. But they're given the charge, they're given a mandate to do this sort of stuff. So there's a case to look at all those sorts of things. I know that normally we got a former finance minister in the room, the former finance DG here, and you got former DGs here from departments who are victims to the treasury during budgeting times, and former ministers also. So we know how powerful the treasury is, and I think you have a role to play in speaking up on this issue and giving some sort of leadership in government. That's my speech on this matter. You don't have to respond now, because this is a broadcasted meeting. So, it's not a closed meeting. Let's go on to we adopt the report. We've done it already, okay. Then we go on to the annual review and the business plan. Gideon, you spoke about it earlier.
Thank you, Chair. If I could, I think the annual review we have approved early on, so I'm not going to focus on that. What we need to do here, and what I need to ask the Commission, is that they approve the business plan that was submitted by the Secretariat. So the intention is now not for me here to go through the detailed plan. There's a very detailed plan that has been circulated to commissioners. They've seen that. But what I thought might be the best use of time is to do two things, is to give the Commission assurance on why the Finance and Governance Committee was comfortable to endorse the plan as submitted by Secretariat, and then recommend it for approval to the Commission. And then two, if there are questions, to allow for questions. And then with that, I honestly hope the Secretariat will not leave me alone and help to address that. So if I could approach on that assumption. So first of all, and we've discussed a lot of that. So this is just a continuation from the plan before. However, there are a couple of things, and that's what I want to highlight
couple of things that the Secretariat has done to adapt and to take into consideration. The first one, so basically in the plan, the vision, the purpose, all of those things have been adapted to take into consideration the changing local environment. And the one we've spoken about it earlier on as well is the changing legislative context, the upcoming enactment of the climate change bill. That will certainly change, but the business plan as submitted now makes provision for that change. So we were comfortable that we don't need to stop it and that the Commission can approve. Secondly, the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, we've discussed that. The big thing at the moment is obviously succession planning and continuation. But again, we're comfortable, and the Commission spoke about it earlier on, that it's a difficult situation, but it's being managed, and we need to minimize the impact of that on the work of the Commission. So that's another reason why the committee felt comfortable. Then thirdly, and it was also debated, discussed in the last year, the theory of change. I mean, some of the Commission, well, quite frankly, we discussed that at length, I think 2 or 3 meetings ago. But the important part, and that you'll see in the business plan, is the realization that the Commission's role in society, the whole focus of having insight, inclusion, impact, that getting consensus is it is very important, but the journey on how we take communities with us to get to and stakeholders, and I think that was also came out today in the debates here. So we're comfortable that the Secretariat has taken that into consideration. And for example, and I do not have intention to go into the detail, but in the budget, there's increased provision for workshops and engagement with people. And we felt that is the right thing to do. So that's the third assumption, reason why we're comfortable. Then the second last one is in this plan, as has been the custom up to now, there are detailed milestones in terms of progress. And from time to time, and today was actually good to see how it manifests itself. Quite a number of the debates and the decisions that were taken here, the reports were part of those milestones. So we were comfortable that in this 3-year business plan, there's sufficient targets so that from a committee's point of view, it could be monitored, and then we can show progress to the Commission. And then lastly, also the organizational restructure. We've had that, the organogram, etc. So all of that's taken into account. So Chairperson, with that, I'm going to conclude and say that's why we're comfortable to recommend that the current business plan, as it has been circulated, most people here had an opportunity to comment on it, that the Commission can approve that. But obviously, if there are detailed questions, we're also happy to entertain them.
Ryan, you happy? Good, thank you very much. And then the next one for approval is the monitoring and evaluation framework. Melissa?
Deputy Chair, I understand actually that this doesn't have to come to the whole Commission for approval. It's actually been adopted by the working group as a technical report in terms of the hierarchy of the Commission. So we don't need to put that to
Good.
this. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. I just said, before we end up, Minister Gordhan, we dealt with the report from the CEO of Eskom. He was here. I think you were not present at the time. We did get your apology. And just to mention that it was, there was a lot of excitement in the room because some of the commissioners said the comprehensive and open and frank manner in which he dealt with matters, people appreciated. Of course, many commissioners congratulated him and Eskom on the lights being kept on for quite a long period of time, and what's happening now, and a good performance. There was quite a bit of discussion about the extension of the life of power stations which were planned for decommissioning, and what that means both from a financial point of view and from an emissions point of view. He dealt with that quite openly. So it was really good to have him here, and I think it was like a breath of fresh air, if I must say. So thanks for that. But I must, I don't know if this is your last meeting of the commission. I just want to say from the side of the commission as such, that the participation of cabinet ministers in the work of this commission is really in many ways what makes this commission. Otherwise, you've got other stakeholders chatting amongst themselves about things which are not going to matter at all. You know, we can talk until we're blue in our face. So what if the people with power and money are not here and the authority to make laws? And so, and I think that you have been one of those right from the beginning that has come here and participated in the work of the commission. And I must say, not only participated, you know, sometimes ministers come when their item is on the agenda or they need to make a presentation to the commission. You've been here just to participate, and that, I think it's been really exemplary. And I must just say it hasn't gone unnoticed, and really been appreciated as such. From the side of the commission, we don't know where you're going to from here, but we heard you're not going back to government. So wherever you're going to, we wish you well. And I think the executive director has asked that he be given an opportunity also to say a few words. So can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Just building on your remarks, we'd like to make a very small token gift of thanks to the Minister. We understand this transition from being a minister back to an ordinary member of the public is never easy. And you've got to take charge of a whole lot of personal things that normally you've got an army of staff. So the gift we've chosen for you, I can assure you it's well below the threshold for declaration. And the secretary who chose it for you has informed me that it's a travel cable and electronic accessory organizer case bag, which is a useful and durable leather pouch, which is functional, neat, keeps all your electronic accessories in one place, multiple compartments, wide range of accessories, yada, yada. I can send you the description. So, Minister, on behalf of the whole commission.
Take the picture again for the cameras. Stand that side. We'll do it again.
Chair, firstly, let me congratulate all of you for the excellent work that the PCC is doing. As you know, on many occasions, I've repeated the point that what matters is what happens on the ground. So I thought the file I got was this thick of paperwork, but I think it's the impact that we make amongst the communities around Komati, whatever, that makes the lives. And I'm sure in the next phase of the work of even with the money that we have, the generosity of the treasury, were not quite known for generosity, but these are good. So you can get some money. You'll be able to get some of the practical things going. And it's been a privilege to be here. to learn from all of you and all the different representatives of different constituencies. And hopefully South Africa can set the pace on that continent in terms of FP. As far as Eskom is concerned, I've encouraged the board and the CEO to create real professional dedicated capacity to get the program going. And hopefully the lessons might be have learned. But I think in the next few months, you'll begin to see different kind of movement. So good luck for the future. I'm joining your rank.
Well, you know, I'm going to repeat a story I said when you weren't here, but only because you are here now and you were Minister of Finance once, and but the old DG of Finance knows. When I retired, the elections were held on the 27th of April 2004, but they pay us our paycheck on the 25th of the month. So I got my paycheck already, and then I retired on the 27th, and about 3 months later, the Environment Department wrote to me and said they erroneously overpaid me by 4 days because they pay you till the end of the month. They sent the claim for the amount and said I should pay it back. And I had to pay it back. In those days, the checkbook wasn't yet outdated. So I posted a check to them. They were happy with that. But thank you very much. The minutes of the previous meeting, are there anybody wants to change the minutes, amend it in any way? If not, thank you, then it's approved. And that brings us to the end of our meeting. I think lunch is served for those of you who are able to stay for lunch. Thank you and travel well.